Do we have any declarations of interest in relation to any items on this morning's agenda? Councillor Kerr. James.
I'd lost the internet there. I've got my second job at 11:25.
Okay, it would be a challenge, but I'm not entirely sure we'll be able to have the meeting finished by then, but understand that if you have to go. Okay, we move on to the minute of the meeting on the 23rd of March. Are we happy to agree that as a true record?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is there anything that anyone would wish to highlight that maybe isn't contained on the agenda? Councillor Nimmo?
Just a quick point, convener, and it's in relation to the next item, the presentation by the director. I appreciate all the updates that we get from our officers, but I would have thought at the very least we would have had a list of items that he intended to cover in this verbal update.
Convener, are we still on minutes?
We are still in the minute, and we'll deal with that as we come to the presentation from the director. Move on to the rolling action log. Oh, sorry, Lynn.
I just wanted to ask whether when the director gives his presentation, whether we'll
Lynn,
get...
is this related to the minute? Because that's where we are at the moment.
Yes, the update on Connected Falkirk, because it talks about the rollout of PCs for pupils, but there were very few rolled out in the last report, and the report is to be completed by August. So I would think it would be appropriate to have an update, given that we put additional funding into this for the sprint team, and as yet very few of these PCs have been rolled out. Well, at our March meeting there weren't, so I would appreciate an update on that.
I don't know if the director will be in a position to give that update today. I'm sure he'll be able to provide an update to members in due course on that, and there will of course be a report that will come back to members with a full update on the progress. Robert, if you can just very, very briefly, because I don't want to deviate from the information that's coming forward, but also it's not something that's on the agenda.
You're right, convener. There will be a report after the summer with full details. But what I can advise committee today is that the devices have been rolled out fully to 3 secondary schools and 18 primary schools. As we stand, there have been some delays as we've had to continue to observe bubbles in schools, but we hoped to be able to progress very quickly once we get to August. But as I say, we'll bring a report probably to the September committee detailing just exactly the status of the rollout. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If we can move on to the rolling action log. Robert, is it directly related to the minute?
Absolutely, no, it's a rolling action log, convener.
Right, thank you.
Item 546. In the comments it says that 546 succeed to date shelter model. In the comments it says an update on Connected Falkirk going to education, children and young people executive 23rd of March.
And there was a report on the 23rd of March to the executive. It's obviously just not been updated.
Okay, thank you, convener.
Is there anything else in the rolling action log? No, okay, thank you. We move on to item 5, presentation by the Director of Children's Services. There has been a number of announcements and a number of programmes in the interim between the last executive and this executive, a lot of it has been announced at very, very short notice. And the director just felt it was important that members got some factual information brought forward on just exactly where we are. It is only designed to be for information. There is no question of taking any decisions on items today, and it's not an item for debate. It's really just to share information with members. So I'll ask Mr. Naylor just to give us a short presentation.
Thank you, Convener. The first thing I want to update the committee on is that the Scottish Government has made the decision to roll out free school meals beyond what has been the position for the last number of years, which is free school meals for all primary 1 to 3. So starting in August, there'll be free school meals for all primary 1 to 4s. Then starting in January for all primary 1 to 5s. And then from August the following year, there'll be free school meals for all children primary 1 to primary 7. And we got confirmation just a couple of weeks ago that the funding will come to us to make that possible. And as we speak, our catering team are making the necessary arrangements to make sure that when we get to August, we can meet that ask for all primary 1 to 4s to be having a free school meal. The second item is the Scottish Government announced a £20 million fund for Scotland for an enhanced summer offer of a national summer of play and activities. Falkirk's share of that funding is £444,000, and the activities have to be designed to support children, young people and families who may otherwise struggle to access active experience during the school holidays. So what has happened in Falkirk is that Corporate Housing Services are leading on the summer of play activities. So there's a working group has been established involving education, social work, CLD, Falkirk CVS, Falkirk Community Trust, Forth Valley NHS and Third Sector have been established to coordinate the distribution of these funds. The working group meets weekly to coordinate the process, and a collaborative approach is being used to make sure that our excellent partnership working that was developed during COVID can continue. So a grant scheme has been set up to enable groups and services to develop their own programmes of activities, and the closing date for application of the grants was on Friday afternoon, was yesterday, 31st of May. The grant panel will then distribute the funds so that the various organisations that are coming forward with programmes of activities can make the necessary arrangements before the end of term to communicate with schools and young people where these activities are and how they will be accessed. The working group are working with First Bus to make sure that eligible children get access to travel, and part of the work is to make sure that the offer is made as equitable across the various districts of the council. So that is very much work in progress, and I thought it appropriate that the committee knows A, that we've got that money, and B, that a whole variety of colleagues and other organisations are working to make sure that the offer is as broad and targeted as it possibly can be. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Is there any questions or for clarification just around the summer activities? Councillor Reid.
No, sorry, Convener, it's not about that, it's about another matter. Do you want me to mention the other matter?
Well,
I take your points. I don't intend to have a debate on it. I'm just looking for information.
If it's purely for information, then yes.
It is, yeah. It's to do with the assessments or examinations, as they used to be called. I understand the Secretary for Education is making an announcement this afternoon. I just wondered what the implications of that would be, or are we in the dark as to what she will say?
Well, I'm certainly in the dark as to what the announcement or what the statement's going to be, but I'll ask Mr Naylor if he has any further knowledge.
No, convener. I know that there is to be an announcement, but I don't have any understanding of what the content of that announcement will be.
It's just that it follows that the head teachers don't know what's happening either, so there are implications for the issue of results and so on. But as I say, I don't intend to debate it, convener, just to illustrate an unsatisfactory situation.
I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying, but I say that we can only act on what information that we are given and shared with us. And I was only aware just at the tail end of last week that there was going to be a ministerial statement given in relation to the assessments. There's no further details, and if the director's got no further details, then we are where we are. If there requires to be any feedback to members following that, then I'm sure Mr Naylor can arrange for a briefing note to be circulated accordingly.
Yes, that would be very helpful, convener.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Coombs.
Thanks, convener. Excuse me, sorry, it was just with regard to the summer activity programme. Obviously, I'm aware that the last few years the trust ran these activity programmes in order that the more deprived children had something to eat as well as something to do during the holidays. And I just wondered what criteria is going to be used, because it's now going to be this new conglomerate of groups of people that are going to be getting funds to run these programmes. What is the criteria? Is it that any pupil can ask to be a part of this, or are we just giving it to children who've already getting free school meals? Or, I mean, who are we aiming this at, and how many people are we talking about being involved?
My understanding is it's much broader than just the free school meals. I think it's those that have been impacted by COVID particularly, but I'll ask Mr Naylor, who probably have a wee bit more detail around the actual criteria.
I'll maybe ask Mr Greenhorn just to go into a bit more detail on that, convener.
That's fine. Gary?
I love it when I ask a question that he's more than one to answer.
Okay, thanks, convener. Let's just say that there are a group, council-wide group being set up just now to look at that question. Around the table are members of the Falkirk Community Trust, are members from Corporate and Housing, are members from CLD and other groups as well. To answer Councillor Coombs' question, and I think the convener was correct that it isn't just around targeted at those children with free school meals. The wider definition around deprivation and those that have been impacted by COVID. So I think the parameters of the scheme this year compared to last year have extended somewhat. The details are not yet known, but once they are known from that group, and hopefully the group will be concluding various things by way of their engagement with the third sector as well in this, we can put around a briefing session to all members to tell members exactly what's going to be involved in it. But it's very fast moving, and I can't give you any more information than that because of it, but I will put a briefing note out once we know more information.
So it's more by invitation than by application from pupils. We're going to decide who's taking part.
Not necessarily. I think there may be some, and I can't preempt what will come up, but there may be a balance between targeted and some universal provision. Again, that will come out once the group concludes the various decisions that they're going to make in the next week or so.
Okay. I think I maybe saw David Mackay wanted to make comment on that as well.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Just to come in, Councillor Coombs, to basically say what we're trying to do is destigmatise the process as well, so we're not just highlighting those in most need. So it's going to be a broader offer this year, so that we're not actually then having those individuals having to kind of put themselves forward and basically be seen to be identifying themselves. So the offer is going to be much broader than that. But as Gary has said, we're just trying to work out what's the best way of doing that, so we're not going to stigmatise any particular groups of our young people, but equally we would target those that we need to as well.
Okay, I was going to say, because we had a lot of debate with my Falkirk Trust hat on last year when the Trust was running these programmes. I know that, and that's why I asked the question. I think it's important. Also, I think it's a shame it's not the Trust that's running it this year. We're having to look to external people to help, but there you go. Thank you.
I think that's more about capacity and the short timescales to be able to deliver, to use this funding. But the Trust have delivered very good activity programmes in the past and will continue to do so this year. But I think it's the capacity that is the issue there, and they need to look to
Yes.
widen out to our third sector partners to be able to actually fulfil the demand that's likely to come. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Convener. Given the amount of school missed by young people this year, that this is the most deprived cohort of children, is this summer school or summer programme going to be based around learning through play? Thank you.
Okay, I don't know which. I'll go to Robert. I'll pick on Robert to answer that particular question.
Well, the scheme is designed to help children re-socialise, become more active. So it will be broadly based on play, but there'll also be learning activities similar to the programmes that the Trust have operated in the past. So I don't doubt that there might be groups that are supporting literacy development, but it's not designed specifically as more school. It's much more focused on being fun, being active, and learning through play. But as Gary mentioned earlier, once we've got all the details of what the expanse of the offer is going to be from the Trust, from ourselves, and from the various organisations within CVS, we can pull together a briefing to give you a much better overview of all of the activities that are going to take place over the summer, and to pick up on Councillor Coombs' point, a bit more detail about who will be attending.
Okay, is there any further questions or clarification? Okay, Councillor Nimmo, then Councillor Bissett.
Yep, just a quick point, Convener, it is in relation to the presentation. Robert, just in relation to your presentation and the items that you spoke on there, is there any impact on the accuracy of the previous minutes or indeed the role and action log? Is there any items contained in that your presentation is going to have an impact on?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Convener. Just a question on the free school meals. Will that funding be baselined into the council budget going forward? And on the summer of play, it sounds like a great idea. I think we should all get involved in that. Thank you.
Robert.
So, as with all grants, it would be my expectation that in the fullness of time, it will be baselined into the council budget. But as with early years funding, which currently comes as a ring-fence grant, we are receiving a grant for the rollout of free meals. We'll get another grant for the primary fives, and then another grant for the sixes and sevens. And it would be my expectation that probably within a year of full implementation, the government will not deliver that by way of a grant, but will put it into the general fund that we get on an annual basis. That's what we expect to happen, but at the moment it's coming very much as dedicated grants for the various different phases.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor McHugh.
Thanks, Convener. It's really just to say thanks to Robert and thanks to the team. As we're all been aware, this year and a half, you could say, has been constant update and constant support coming from the Scottish Government in the way of monies and advice. And we'd just like to say thanks for the update of what's coming ahead over the summer, Robert, and thank you for your team for grabbing whatever money we get and trying and working out as best possible to support our children throughout the district. So thanks.
Thanks, Councillor McHugh. I think that was a really helpful to recognise the work that's been done by the staff, and often under quite difficult and challenging circumstances, to be able to deliver some of these programmes. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Convener. I'll be brief. It's just a question for either Gary or Robert. With the free school meals increasing until all primary school children are eligible, which is for me is a great thing. Will that affect the amount of catering staff we have? Will it need to be increased each school?
Robert.
Yes, it will, and that will be subject to, that will be what the grant is used for. Our current planning indicates that the first phase of this for the primary 1 to 4s won't have a very significant impact, but as we get to the full implementation for primary 1 to primary 7, Gary's team are already looking at some of our kitchens that are not production kitchens perhaps becoming production kitchens, and there will be a requirement as the dining halls become fuller for there to be more staff employed. That's likely to be for the second phase, so from next January, but certainly will be for the third phase, which is the primary 6s and 7s that kicks off August the following year. So it'll be a gradual scaling up, but in the first instance for this coming August, there won't be any significant change in our requirements. Maybe just go to Gary to see if he's got anything to add to that.
Okay, thanks. Gary?
No, just to say, you're absolutely spot on, Robert. Yes, there will be additional staff that's needed, both in terms of catering staff, potential cleaning staff, and potential support staff in schools. But looking at that just now, and their intention would be to bring our report after the recess to this committee to give a general update on the progress, where we are with the plans going forward. As Robert says, we're not expecting any major hurdles. We'll always have challenges around implementing it from August, but there will be some things that we'll need to do to put corrective action in place to make sure that we can deliver from P5s from January. But our report will come to this executive committee after the recess that gives more information on that very relevant question.
Thank you very much, Convener. And just before I finish, similar to Councillor McHugh, like to congratulate them, the team, on delivering this at very short notice. And it's a very short notice, and it's a time scale that we're given. And if you didn't act quick, you lose that time scale and you lose the money. So great for the team, great for Falkirk Council. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Okay, I see no more hands indicated for any further questions. So if we can thank Robert and move on. And moving on to item 6, which is the Early Learning and Childcare 1140 Expansion Plan update. And Gary.
Thank you very much, Convener, and I'm really pleased to bring what's perceived to be another positive report to the Executive Committee this morning. The purpose of the report is outlined in section 4.14. aims are contained in there. There's 7 recommendations before the committee today. They're outlined in section 2.1. There's context around the national background and also local context. That's outlined in section 3.1 and 3.2. Main changes in the considerations are outlined in section 4. Very pleased to say that at the current moment we're now down to 15 projects that are outstanding, and there's work on site progressing really just now on the majority of these. I'm also pleased to say that Abbott's Grange at Murray Primary School, the work's been completed. We're just waiting this week to get a completion certificate. It's another major project that's effectively wrapped up in the bag, and it's a very, very positive work that's going on the site there. Section 4.2. This looks at the number of deferred children that are already registered to for a place for the ELC establishments in August. Around 230 are currently registered. What we're proposing here is that we bring in 2 temporary staff on a temporary 1-year basis. This is going to help us to work part of the central team to develop play pedagogy and learning plans, and to link very much in line with our frontline ELC staff. It's very important that we make sure that because of the increased number of 5-year-olds, we have got the play delivered in a correct manner. Also in a correct manner, that they've got to then take some learning from it. And also important, we've got to make sure that when those children, 5-year-old, do transition to P1, they do so in a seamless manner. So the proposal here is that we would bring in 2 temporary staff for a year. The cost is £65,000 in the current financial year, and that is funded entirely from the grant that the government are giving us to look at the Fair Places pilot. As it is a pilot, we're learning from it, and that's the reason that the posts are going to be temporary. So we do learn from it, and hopefully whatever we do, it helps support the training and also the development of the frontline ELC staff to make sure they can deliver it as professional staff can. In terms of moving on from our very positive and really well received early intervention strategies, there are a couple more outlined, I'm pleased to say, in section 4.3. The first one is around the progressing to appoint some community childminders. This is really much community childminders. It's really looking at supporting those children that have got known additional support needs or who require slightly more nurturing support to get them into mainstream settings, slightly different from the normal childminder requirements. The proposal here is that it would be a staged enhanced transition project, and it would support children to build up the confidence to maintain a full-time place in a setting at a later date. Probably the same thing you asked, we did, and we've presented it in a table. The previous questions from the members quite rightly were asking for some details around the community, the childminders that are available on a ward-by-ward basis, and the number that are provided funded ELC places. The table's there. They do show us a number of things. It shows that in some wards, no surprise, particularly some of the rural wards, that we need to look at, see if we can increase the number of childminders. Again, these are questions quite rightly that members have posed at previous meetings. So the proposal is that at the moment, we're going to work with the SCMA to try to recruit another 10 childminders with a community focus in the 5 wards that are identified in 4.3.1. The estimated annual cost of this is £60,000, and that can be met from existing funding. Also, in terms of phase 6 of our staged intervention strategies, we're looking to the education psychology service. Now, this has been subject of much debate, very positive comments, and some challenges around the executive over the last couple of meetings. The psychological support cannot be underestimated. The emotional well-being and mental needs of our children and young people are absolutely paramount, and we take it very seriously. So seriously that the proposal before the committee today is we're going to appoint a senior education psychologist. That senior education psychologist will be primarily focused on early learning and childcare. And also it's proposed that we establish a childcare allocation review and evaluation care group for short. And that senior post, if it is approved, will be chairing that particular group. We think this is another demonstration of early intervention at the heart of what we're doing. We're embedding it in the processes, we're aligning it to all the professional groups, internal and external, and a whole array of services to make sure we deliver what's best for the young people of Falkirk. The cost of this is £85,000, and again, it can be met from the existing funding package that we've got. Section 4.4 just outlines where we are with the current temporary restrictions fund. Unfortunately, we've not quite finished round 3 yet in terms of the financial reconciliation, so I'll update members what we've paid out. But it shows that we've paid out just over £75,000 to local childcare providers to help them being supported through the COVID challenging situation that we've all faced. In terms of section 4.5, it confirms that the most recent progress report submitted to the improvement service, it was a progress snapshot at week commencing the 26th of April, and that's been submitted. I felt it was important for members of the committee just to see some of the stats in a broad-based approach. 3,728 children are currently in ELC placements, it breaks that down to the age groups and also looks then at analysis of the sector placements. I'm pleased to say that in terms of the private sector, the PVI sector, we're now up at 16% of our young people are in placements between private nurseries and childminders. Members may recall we set what we then thought was an ambitious target of hitting roughly 13% of that. We've now exceeded that, and that shows the emphasis on giving a blended approach and parental choice in the matter. 4.6 sets out a new challenge for us under the Scottish Milk and Healthy Snack Scheme. The apologies, because I would like to have gone into more detail, but the guidance that's been put out in this just now is still in draft form. We're expecting the final guidance to come out in the next week or so. So what I will do to the committee, I'll provide a more detailed update on this at a meeting after the recess. But in broad terms, the scheme aims to ensure that all children in childcare setting, that's early years, not primary age children, will receive a daily serving of milk and a healthy snack. The eligibility of the scheme is open to any childcare setting, including all childminders, whether they're in partnership or not. The key is that they have to be registered with the Care Inspectorate. The Scottish Government have asked all local authorities to administer it, and they will provide an administration grant for doing this. The key dates just now were, it said that the registration was to be completed by the 31st of May. Unfortunately, that date slipped because the guidance just now is still in draft form, but we're expecting that guidance to be amended to say that the registration is to be completed by the end of June. Nonetheless, Falkirk is already well underway with considering the registration process and talking to our private PVI sector about this. The proposal here is that this is going to be linked to a really good Marvellous Mealtimes project in terms of the aims and ambitions about it. No one would want anyone not to have some milk and a healthy snack in any of our settings. The main aim is that the councils will provide a grant or a subsidy for any child that's in any setting where the setting can provide that milk or a healthy snack. At the moment, it's probably going to be based on a daily rate, but it'll be annualised and then the payments will be made, at the moment, we think, every term, subject to some financial paperwork and some financial reconciliations. Proposal here is that we appoint a 1 FTE administration officer. Certainly this would be for at least 1 year to we get up and running with the scheme, and after that we may review it after that. But certainly we need the administration office to set up the scheme and help it run for the first year, and then we can take stock of it and make any amendments thereafter. That £45,000 comes directly from the administration grant that the Scottish Government are giving the council. Section 4.7 outlines some proposals to conduct a review of our current emissions policy. This is really just to consider the impact and effect that the blended approach has had on the number of children in their settings, and also to look at how these settings are allocated. Again, it's going to consider demand and supply and look at how we can maximise occupancy in these settings. As part of this review, it will also consider those schools where we have had difficulty in increasing ELC capacity, mainly because of the infrastructure challenges on site, and we'll also consider the potential displacement effect having the deferred 5-year-old policy may have, particularly on 3-year-olds. So over the summer, officers are going to do a bit of work, and we would report back on that conclusion of that work after the recess. 4.8 also outlines an internal review. Members will recall we had a DSM review to try to align some of the staff component parts in our nursery classes with those of our early learning and childcare centres a couple of months back. That was successful. This is looking at just the same thing. It's looking at how, and particularly in those nursery classes with high capacity, to make sure have they got the correct senior staff structure in place there. So that's what it's going to look at. We're going to do that work over the summer. There is no question of us cutting back staff here. The question here is, have the nursery classes, particularly some of the larger ones, got the right senior staff in place? Any senior staff augmentation will also then in turn support the primary school management as well. 4.9, I'm very pleased to say that we had concluded the consultation on the Denny ELCC renaming, And the proposed renaming of the centre is Myatt View ELCC as outlined in section 4.9. 4.10 turns now to the sustainable rate payments to private partner nurseries from August 21. As part of the contract for private nurseries, we are talking to them about an inflationary rise to come into effect from August 21. At this point in time, there's quite a lot of national work going on around benchmarking from national associations, and indeed the government early years team are conducting some benchmarking work around what other authorities are paying just now by way of sustainable rates and looking at the various component parts of it. So that being said, what we will be doing is we'll be bringing this work to a conclusion at some point over the summer to be reflected in the new contracts that will be issued prior to August for our partner provider colleagues. The proposal is on that is that the director would take a decision under delegated powers subject to whatever was agreed being affordable within the context of the current budget, and we would report back after the recess to this committee. In terms of the implications, the financial resources are outlined in section 6.1, and again I'll make the point that we look at the resources as a combination of revenue and capital to deliver the project, and we remain very confident that we'll be able to deliver that project within the overall total revenue capital projects resources that we have. In terms of the risk inequalities, they're set out in section 6.3 through to 6.6. And in conclusion, I would say that we're now really reaching a very pivotal and exciting part. There's lots of our fairly larger projects that are underway now, and they'll be concluding over the summer or just after the summer. And the team are really focused on making sure that we deliver these projects to make sure that the young people of Falkirk get the infrastructure and the settings that they deserve. Happy to take any questions. And also Karen Thompson, the project officer, the project lead, is also in attendance at the meeting today.
Thank you, Gary, for again a very fulsome but very positive report. But I'll go to Councillor McHugh.
Thanks, convener, and thanks, Mr. Greenhorn, for yet again an excellent report with a lot of detail this time as we move forward. What inspires me is really, given that we've had a bit of hold-ups with our projects, this team has pushed forward, jumped the hurdles and pushed forward in different ways. They've created a professional and a team that will guide our children and support our families in the earliest, most crucial years. And that to me is just a fantastic thing to be involved in. Not only that, we're also ensuring that our wee children have got full bellies so they can learn without feeling hungry, which is vitally important. And as you know, there's been a lot of debate on that nationally, UK-wide over the last 12 months or so. Moving forward with this team of professionals and support staff, you can't question that this report tells us that our children are at the centre of every decision that we're making, and this team has thought of every single possibility. Childminders in our communities that can support children that maybe can't cope with a full day at nursery, or maybe it's not suitable for them. Different journeys that children will go on, different pathways that they'll take, they've all been thought of and they're all been provided, and that is again inspiring to me and fantastic move forward. Phase 5 and phase 6, again, we're building, we're supporting, we're moving forward, and we're creating something that's not been created before, a mental health service for our youngest children, something where we can get in there, early intervention and support families. Often in my past, you know, it was parents that struggle. You know, you hear about the terrible twos where, you know, children become Jekyll and Hyde basically overnight, and parents are pulling their hair out often, and really all they need is sometimes a sympathetic ear, and other children maybe need that further support, and that support's going to be there, and that's fantastic. And I can't thank the staff enough right across the early years service, for their professionalism and for their dedication, really. One question I've got before I move this report is, now that we're putting all that in place and we're moving at a speed, what are we doing in the background to ensure that all the things that we are putting in place is actually working going forward? Because we will be scrutinising, and obviously we've always mentioned that nothing is set in stone, and if things are not quite working, then are we putting something in place where we can be flexible enough to change that? That's report, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McHugh. Gary, do you want to maybe comment on the question that was asked around performance management?
Absolutely, convener, and thanks. It's a really relevant question. But hopefully what we have demonstrated is throughout this project, we've made constant changes to it. We've not rested on our laurels. We've looked forward, we've looked back, we've looked 360 degrees at times here. Quality is going to be important here, and we've got to make sure that what we've got going forward is a quality provision. And part of this, the strengthening of the central team that members supported us with the proposals to do, brings that quality element into it. Now, at the same time, we're also looking today, if we get the proposals agreed, to strengthen the team by another 2 people that are going to look primarily focus at 5-year-olds. But that again, strengthening in the central team. If people come into the central team, that the learning is shared with the central team, but quality is going to be at the heart of what we do going forward. And what we will do is, once we get over the current hurdle and we all can breathe a slight sigh of relief, but not a big sigh of relief, to get the project delivered, we'll then be really focusing on how we can maintain it, and the quality will become significant then. So I expect the further reports will look at that question that Councillor McHugh quite rightly asked about the quality impact and how we take that forward. And David and his team are also really geared up to do that as well.
Okay, thank you, Gary. I think, is it Councillor Colley?
Thank you. Just in seconding this report, I'm welcoming the update on this. It's a very significant piece of work, and Adana talked about the work involved. It's huge, and I think recognising the skills of our officers who've led and delivered this, including alongside managing the challenges of COVID, I think it's pretty incredible, to be honest. Just a couple of points about welcoming the pilot on deferment. It's clear with the number of families taking this option that there's a clear demand for it, giving parents that option when they feel their child is not ready for primary school. It's certainly in the best interest of children as they start their education journey, and I very much support the inclusion of additional funding for the pilot. It's good to see the expansion in the number of community childminders. It's an important piece of the puzzle for parents and their children, given greater choice of options that meet the needs of families. I particularly welcome, as you might imagine, the level of childminders in my own ward of Denny and Backnock, and with increased capacity available. Obviously, the picture of availability is very variable across the ward, so very much important that the additional funds are made available to ensure that all families have this choice, whichever ward they live in. Similarly, identifying additional needs of children and families at the earliest stage is vital, and as such, the establishment of the group in additional education and psychology input are important tools in ensuring children are at the very heart and have the very best start. Also note the Scottish Milk and Healthy Snacks Scheme and the work the Council is undertaking. And I welcome the proposal to recruit additional administration to support the ongoing development of Marvellous Mealtimes. It's a great example of good practice, and those involved in developing and continuing to develop that should be very rightly parried. Finally, just a couple of words about my own ward. It would be remiss of me not to highlight the renaming of Denny ELCC and welcome the new My View ELCC. Lots of CCs in there. It's fantastic, and welcome the ongoing work on Headofmuir Primary School and the upcoming plans to carry out work in Denny Primary School, with the plans for accommodation whilst the work's undertaken. Across the district, we can see the final stages of delivering the physical capacity, and just finally, just to say thank you to all involved in working through this. It's been fantastic work, and I think Adana said it, and I think we all very much appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Colley. And Councillor Reid.
Yes, thank you, Convener. On behalf of the Labour Group, I'd like to third the report. It's a very good report from a very good team. Just one or two little questions. In the case of childminders, how confident is Gary that they'll be able to recruit the numbers required?
Gary.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. I could perhaps pass that one over to Karen Thompson, Councillor Reid, who really liaises on a weekly basis with the CMA, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, Gary.
Welcome, Karen.
Hi there. Yeah, so our colleague, our Training and Development Officer, Margaret Aitken, who has responsibility for engaging with and recruiting our childminders, has already sent out an invitation or an expression of interest invite to childminders. So we have had a large response. More than 10 have responded to say they would absolutely be interested in engaging with us and finding out a little bit more about that. So we are at the stage now where we are finalising some arrangements or discussions with them to be able to say this is what it would look like and this is what we would expect from you as a childminder, the service that you would work in partnership with us to deliver. So there is a good interest, and we are confident that we will be able to get 10 across the whole of the Falkirk Council boundary area.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Councillor Reid.
Yes, thanks, Karen. That's the quality of answer we're used to from coming from yourself. The next question is on the Educational Psychology Service. As you know, in the past and for the successive administrations have been presented with cuts to education psychology. It's the group that's being set up. Will that include the parents who have perhaps come through this experience? That not be to our advantage?
Okay, I don't know who's best placed to answer that.
Councillor
Gary?
Reid, do you mean the early intervention group?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so
4.3.2, yeah.
yeah, so absolutely, all children and families can what's the word I'm looking for, situations are considered. So if we do have parents who have been care experienced parents and that is part of the profile of needs for the children, then absolutely they would be considered when an application or referral is made to the care group.
I was thinking of those whose families may well have grown up in the interim, but still keep in touch with the educational system.
Yeah, I mean, we're really keen to consult throughout this whole process. This is a sort of reinvention of what we've done in the past, but with improvements and being much more proactive. So we do intend to consult with parents to ascertain what would have helped, what could have helped, and what could we do better this time. So we will engage with parents throughout the process as well, and reflect on the referral process and the interventions that are made, so that we are reflecting and, as Councillor McHugh said, reviewing our process as we go ahead to make sure that it is meeting the needs of our target, and it is actually making a difference to these families.
Thanks for that. Last question on a slightly lighter note is the milk and healthy snack scheme. As we raised at the briefing, Gary, there are types of milk other than those emanating from cows. Will that be taken into consideration with increasing veganism, for example?
It will, Councillor, and if I could read just a very short paragraph from the current draft guidance. It just says that where children cannot drink cow's milk for medical, ethical or religious reasons, the scheme will provide goat or sheep milk. And where, for those reasons, children cannot drink either of these, the scheme will allow a non-dairy alternative, being a drink, which is an unsweetened calcium-enriched liquid, to be provided. So yes, although it's in its development stages, there is quite clearly a range of milk, probably more so than I'd ever considered before, but a range of milk will be available to our young people in the sentence going forward.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Any other questions from members? Okay, I've got Councillor Coombs, Reverend Rollo and Councillor Munro. Councillor Coombs first.
Thanks, Cecil. It's just a really quick question, Gary. As Pat alluded to there, obviously the educational psychologists have been cut throughout many years because of the budget cuts. And I just wondered, will this psychologist at some point in the future, is it predicted that they will then get a budget to enable them to because one psychologist across the whole school estate is really not going to make a difference given the problems that we've got at the moment. And as I said to you at the briefing, the early intervention team is where we need to be looking, because that then has impact on council budgets for, you know, closer to home and all the costs that are incurred if children aren't picked up with difficult behaviours at that early stage. Then it just has a lasting impact on all public spend with social work, police and perhaps residential care in the long run, in the worst of the cases.
Okay, thanks, Councillor.
Psychology system services is important.
Yep, Councillor Coombs, you're absolutely correct. The idea here is not to much cuts. It's to have a senior psychologist with a sole focus on early learning and childcare, and they would then help work with the rest of the psychologist team just now to help embrace that. Going forward, if there is additional resource requirements that come out of it, then again, as was mentioned earlier on, we will learn from that, we will look at it, and if needs be, we will try to sort it. So it's very much linking with the current team, but with a sole focus on early learning and childcare, and that's what we've not got just now. So it strengthens the team, and we'll review that, as was mentioned earlier on. This will be subject of review to make sure it's embedded with a positive vision and a smooth transition.
Okay, right. Thanks, Gary. I'm just aware that I don't think we have enough SLAs in school to help the teachers, so the psychologist can identify a problem, but if there's not enough, you know, physical resources on the ground.
And I think that's an important point, Councillor Coombs, that part of this care is looking at the resource allocation. So if that care group deems that certain young children have got additional support needs, and those needs need to be met in a set way, then we've got to make sure we provide it. So it's almost like a targeted prioritisation of resources. So that's the way that we see it embedding in going forward, much as the same that we do with primary and secondary age children. So this is the primary focus of that. So you're absolutely spot on.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Thanks, Cecil.
Thank you. And just to say that there's actually been an augmentation of SLAs in the last few years, recognising that their particular role going forward. I'll go to Michael Rollo.
Yeah, thank you, convener. Just want to add my commendation as well. I think it's a very comprehensive report, and it's very encouraging to see all the great work that's been done. And so just wanted to say thank you to Gary and the team.
Thank you, Michael. I'm sure that's really appreciated. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, convener. I noticed that Councillor McHugh said that it was a report that provided a lot of detail. However, when we come to financials, there is actually very little. And when you look at the outstanding projects in terms of early year schools, which amount to something in the order of almost close to 6 million, we're given 500,000 plus, between 50,000 and 200,000. I would have thought that each of these schools would have had a specific contract, and we could have actually given the actual price of the contract, given that we wouldn't have started the work until we actually knew the actual figure on these contracts. And is there a reason why it just says 500,000 plus? Because it makes it very difficult for us to actually determine whether these projects are actually staying within their budgets.
Okay, I know there's a number of factors that have impacted on costs right now, but I'm sure Gary will be able to give a wee bit more detail in relation to why that's there.
Okay, thanks, Convener. Councillor, if you remember that this was an evolving, I think it was Councillor Reid from memory that first raised the issue about how we would try to capture the financial cost of this. And what we're trying to do is we were trying not to make it a postcode lottery effect, so people could compare the amount that was invested. This was looking at the overall estate to bring it up to make sure we met the capacity of needs. And what we agreed to do was just to give members an indicative look at what the overall cost of every project would be. We agreed to the bandings that we've got. You're absolutely correct that there is an ultimate cost of it. Unfortunately, as a lot of these projects are going on, we don't know the final cost of it, albeit we do know that we have got a tender price, etc., for various things. So let me think about it, and we'll see what we can do in the future just to give you that reassurance. But bear in mind, some of these contracts will run over multi-financial years. So what we're trying to do is look at the overall cost of the overall project, and sometimes looking at it in a snapshot of a financial year doesn't give that information. But leave it with me and I'll see what I can do to try to improve it.
Does this cost include build, fit out, furnishings? There are no clues, so we have very little idea of the necessary detail here.
Yep. Councillor Monroe, normally when we report to any committee, it's the overall cost of the whole project. So this is the overall cost, including fit out, site fees, lock, stock and barrel, etc. It's an overall figure that is our total cost for delivering the project in full. But for the next report, I'll make sure we'll look to see if we can give a bit more information on it for you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kerr and Councillor Harris.
Thanks, Convener. Like previous speakers, we welcome the report, and Councillor Colley highlighted a couple of things that were important to myself. That the Fair Places pilot, I've got a 4.5-year-old grandson who, if I ever had the opportunity at the time, would have probably delayed him for another year. So given the parents of Falkirk that this opportunity is great, as I've mentioned previously. As Gary mentioned about the childminders for the area I represent, it's a problem, and I'm glad that it's been identified and they're taking into cognizance that it is a problem, not just my area, but there are other areas there that's been highlighted as well. Just a question regarding the educational psychologist or senior educator. In previous years, we've struggled to recruit this kind of person. How confident are we that we're going to be able to attract somebody with the qualities that we were looking for?
Okay, Karen.
David Mackay would be able to answer that one, Mr.
Okay, apologies, David.
Thanks very much, Convener. Thanks, Councillor. No, absolutely. We've been liaising with Nick Balchin, who's the Principal Educational Psychologist, regarding this situation throughout, and he is fairly confident that we will be able to recruit to this particular position, potentially, first of all, within our existing team, and then backfilling that post as our first port of call. So we've got someone who already knows Falkirk Council and can hit the ground running, and obviously that piece of work, if approved today, will begin very, very swiftly, and we hopefully be able to report in due course that we've been successful. But it is a valid point, because there are challenges, but again, through the conversation we've had with Nick, I think we're reasonably confident we'll get someone.
Thanks, David. I'm just glad that we will be in a position to get this person. And before I'd just like to thank Gary and the rest of the team for, as usual, a comprehensive report. Thank you very much, Convener.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kerr. I'll go to Councillor Harris and then to Councillor McHugh to wind up.
Thanks, Convener. Question slightly preempted by my colleague on their general questions about finance, but specifically I'd like to ask Gary about the Denny Primary School. It's the one project which has seen significant slippage. We know that there were issues around difficulty with groundworks which have caused problems. At the last briefing we had, the last time this came up at the last executive, my understanding was, correct me if I'm wrong, but the project was still out to or subject to re-tendering. I'm assuming that now with a start date of 14th of June that re-tendering has been completed and accepted. That's the first question. And clearly with the difficulties around the groundworks and COVID and our known significant increase in construction costs, does Gary have an estimate whether this particular bit of work is going to come within the previous financial capital envelope? So two questions. So has the tender been accepted, and are we in budget with this particular project, or is it going to go over?
Okay, thanks, Councillor Harris. Just to say that yes, the tender has been accepted. We are expecting the contractors on site this month. It's got a completion date from memory around the end of the calendar year. The challenge we've had is that with all of these projects, from the outset, there was never a particular budget set for it. We look at every individual project, look at what we need, look at the quantum of resources. As I said earlier on, the quantum of resources we've got is both revenue and capital. The flexibility afforded to us means we can move revenue to capital. But what I'm happy to do is give you a direct answer. I'll send you an email to confirm some of the individual questions you've asked about Denny to yourself directly, if that's okay.
It's okay, thank you, Gary. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, before I bring in Councillor McHugh, Councillor Bissett, but just to remind members, we've got a very full agenda today, so if we can keep questions fairly brief, and that'll allow us to be able to get through in a reasonable time. Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Convener. I'll try and be brief. Basically, I'd like to welcome this report. It's a very positive report. As Councillor Reid says, the Labour group welcomes it. Support for our children is vital in their development, and I'm glad to see the educational psychologists come in place to maybe pick up problems early. It ties in with the agenda item 9 later on about wellbeing. So overall, a great report and very positive. And I'd just like to ask Gary about the early learning and childcare and buildings and climate change. I wonder if you could maybe just quickly sort of summarise what we've done, how we've built them, and is there solar panels and stuff like that? What have we tried to do to kind of reduce energy? And the other thing I just wanted to say was, what's the difference between the Scottish Milk and Healthy Snacks scheme and the UK Nursery Milk scheme? And was there any funding came to the UK government for that particular scheme? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Bissett. In terms of your first question, the climate change one is always it's an excellent question, firstly, but it gives us a challenge and also sometimes a headache. But what we have done is that any work that's been done has been using the most efficient, for example, M&E electrical stuff, boiler replacement. All of these will be the front end of being efficient. In terms of the question, have we done anything directly around for example, solar, the photovoltaic panels on roofs, etc. We've not done anything like that as yet, because we're always conscious, had we the money to do it. I think what we will be doing is, once we get everything done, we'll be looking at the whole carbon agenda for the council, and I'm sure that at some point in the future there'll be an investment, not just in early years, but the whole school estate, to look to see how we can improve it to meet the carbon, the really challenging carbon targets that lie ahead for us all. So that's probably an answer to the first part. The second question you had asked about, was it a replacement for the UK nursery milk and snack scheme? And the answer to that is yes. This is the Scottish Government bringing in effectively their own scheme to help substitute that, and also will help replace the equivalent for the EU scheme. There is some 1 year transitional arrangements that are still in place, but effectively this is targeting probably a more direct approach to the childcare settings, with an offer of financial support to provide a milk and healthy snack in Scotland.
Okay, thank you, Gary. I'll go to Councillor McHugh just to sum up.
Yep, and I'll be very brief, just to cover a few points that have been highlighted in the questions during our discussions there. I think first off, with the psychologist, just to reiterate that there will be parents part of the steering group for care, Karen. So there will be parents part of that steering group.
So for the decision-making process group, the care group, there isn't parents on that, but we will involve parents in the review of the process, the new process.
Can we look to ensure that parents, just as Councillor Reid has highlighted, are very much involved and get a chance to comment, especially parents that have maybe gone through a very difficult time themselves?
Yeah, we have the care group that actually makes the decisions about the early intervention and support for these families, but we do also have a strategic business group, so that will look at the actual process and analyse the system. So we can certainly look at involving parents in that to get their feedback.
That's brilliant.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Karen. The second thing I really wanted to highlight was with the psychological team that we're talking about, that things have really changed over the last 20 odd years within child care and in education. And we've got staff there now that are highly qualified, you know, at various levels, that do, as part of their training, some psychology. So, I mean, although we will have the senior psychologist as a steer group, we have got some excellent professional and very experienced staff that will be taking forward his work. So it's a whole team approach. So it's not just a case of focusing on one professional. We're looking at that professional then guiding those that are already very well experienced and qualified to move forward. So I'm very happy with that plan that's been put in place. As far as dairy goes, I think we've had a headache for years in nurseries with allergies and different faiths and that. So that is always paramount. I remember at one time almost feeding a child that had an allergy fish, a piece of fish, and then I found out that he didn't actually have an allergy to fish. It's just that his mum and dad didn't like fish, so he never had it in his diet. But there was a panic at that time, just as he was about to put it in his mouth. So yeah, we're definitely, nurseries are always on the ball as far as diet goes, and ensuring, you know, people, parents' rights, and also children's diets. So that's great. And I'm just thinking about the climate, and the fact that we are promoting outdoors as much as possible must have a natural knock-on effect within our buildings. We've extended play areas, you know, throughout our nursery estate, and that really encourages children to be outdoors more. So obviously the more you're outdoors, then the less energy you'll be using within. The thing that I would like to some scientists to tap into is how we can take children's energy and actually turn it into electricity, because because there's a lot of energy out there that could be tapped into. But thanks, convener, and thanks for the report again.
Thank you, Councillor McHugh. We'll move swiftly on, as I'm mindful of time, on to item 7 in the review of our devolved school management scheme and the update. And this has been a bit of a beast to get to this point, because I think it's taken such a long time with various things. But I think, Gary, you've taken this one?
I will convene it, and hopefully it'll be as brief as I possibly can. The purpose of the report today is outlined in section 1, 3 recommendations before the executive outlined in section 2. Section 3 outlines the background to the scheme and the timelines they were reported previously to committee. The considerations in section 4 focus on a number of things: the Scottish Government strategies, links to national strategies outlined in 4.1. The key principles apply to the DSM scheme are outlined in 4.2, identified from the Fair Funding Review Group, and the key aims of the new DSM guidelines are outlined in section 4.3. There's some examples of within the guidelines, convener, in section 4.3 of how the councils can take forward their development of these schemes. And for those of you who have read the guidance attached to it, I'm very pleased to report that Falkirk are quoted 6 times in the guidance as good practice. And unless my arithmetic is wrong, that's more than any other council that's quoted there. So Falkirk already are at the forefront of leading with it. The section 4.4 outlines the proposals to take forward the guidance. The proposal is to set up a DSM review group. It also shows that how the group will be made up of. The group is proposed will report to the Director of Children's Services. The group also will work collaboratively both with the Regional Improvement Collaborative and the professional associations, and we're also proposing that we'll give regular updates to elected members via information sessions, parents via the Parent Forum, trade unions via our LNCT, and also the Children's Services Partnership Forum. Section 4.5 shows the timelines that we expect to work to, outlining and culminating in our report coming back around about March 2022 to this executive for a final sign-off. In conclusion, just to say that whilst each DSM scheme is individual, many aspects of it are comparable to all local authorities. So that collegiate and collaborative working is very important here. Happy to take any questions, Convener.
Thank you, Gary. Councillor McHugh.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks again, Gary. Yep, this has been a piece of work that's been a long time in working. I don't know if everybody's had the opportunity to read the appendix of the DSM guidelines, but what I took out, what I was really pleased about is that, yeah, we've got guidelines there, national guidelines there that everyone needs to abide by, but there is a lot of scope in there to personalise for our own authority. And I welcome the work that's been going on with other authorities. And as Gary has already highlighted, yet again, we're leading the way as far as the way our team is working out what's best for our direction forward. So I thank you for the report. I appreciate the work that's gone into it, and I look forward to getting involved and seeing the update. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McHugh. And the interesting moving is on. I'm happy to formally second the report. I think it's pays real credit to the staff that we've got, that Falkirk has been mentioned as many times in the guidance for good practice, particularly around training, collaboration with parents, and reducing the bureaucracy. And I know that many are looking to take on board a lot of our practices. So I think the team's done a fantastic job, and as the guidance is now being rolled out, and we'll get further updates. Devolved schools management budgets have always been a real challenge to understand in the past because of the overlaps, etc. But it does give the autonomy to the individual schools as well, to be able to make decisions at the heart where it matters most. So all I can do is say thank you to Gary and indeed to the team for the work that they're doing, and look forward to seeing that as it evolves coming forward. I have Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Convener. I did take the trouble to read the attached and notice that Falkirk was mentioned in a number of places, but I would like to highlight on page, it says 16 or 49, the comments on West Dunbartonshire, which says it has robust systems in place for the effective management and monitoring of finance, ensuring strong financial governance and delivery of best value at both corporate and project level. And I think I would like to see Falkirk included along that basis in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Munro. Any other member wish to? Okay, I have Councillor Nimmo, then Councillor Coombs.
Thanks, Convener. It's just a question for Gary. Gary, as far as the DSM scheme's concerned, does that impact at all on the ring-fenced money that's allocated to schools and head teachers? Is there any crossover of use?
It's a very good question, Councillor Nimmo. It impacts it in as much as the DSM scheme will govern how they manage it and account for it, because within the DSM scheme it allows schools to have the flexibility to provide separate finance codes so that they could properly, as back to what Councillor Munro said, we can have a properly transparent and link to the financial ledger, so it allows schools to account for things in a lot easier. In terms of going forward, if any of the current ring fence grants became mainstreamed, then there's an impact that they could have on the DSM scheme going forward. But effectively, it allows schools to manage their individual ring fence grants in a separate manner through the financial ledgers that everyone would want, and it allows them to make some interfaces with their core grants as well.
Thanks, Gary.
Okay, Councillor Coombs.
Thanks, Convener. In 3.1, it's talking about the fair funding review, and obviously one of the main reasons for the DSM was to try and close the attainment gap. I wondered, have we any evidence that that has actually worked, given that it's been, I don't know, 4 or 5 years that this has been in place, and how are we measuring it to find out if we actually know whether the attainment gap has been closed in any way? Now, I understand that this past year has obviously been strange, but we did have 4 years prior to COVID before, where this was still supposed to be happening as a key driver.
Okay, Mr. Naylor.
Members will recall reports that come to committee. We ordinarily report SQA performance in September, and then ordinarily in the March committee we bring a report on all of the attainment that has measures within it in terms of the different deciles and quintiles. We reported recently the closing of the gap for the lowest 20%, the middle 60%. That's also referenced in our local government benchmarking data. So we do have evidence that the gap in Falkirk is closing. Still have a way to go, but the trend is very much in the right direction, both in terms of school leaver qualifications, but also in terms of the achievement of levels in the primary sector within the broad general education. So that report that I think came to the March committee has that detail in it, and we'll continue to report on our progress with closing the gap on an annual basis.
Okay, great. Thanks, Robert. I'll have a look back and check those figures, but one of the things that concerns me is that sometimes it's not the school leavers, but those that actually don't get as far as the exams as well for various reasons. The other thing that I was wondering about was, I'm aware that there are I can't remember what they're called, school-based, a negotiating committee within the school that speaks. Some of the schools, they take part in the DSM decisions. I don't know if I'm making sense. Is it called there's some sort of negotiating committee that involves more teachers rather than just the head teacher making decisions on the DSM funding. And obviously, the more democratic workplaces are, the more efficient they are. So I don't know if you've got any.
I think Gary's going to answer that.
The committee, and you're quite correct, Councillor Coombs. It's called the SBNC, the School Based Negotiating Committee. Primarily, the job of that is a statutory function linked to the LNC to look at teachers' contracts. However, a lot of schools use that as a wider forum to discuss development plans, etc., etc. One of the things we will be doing as part of this DSM review is looking at if we could take some areas of good practice there and roll and embed that out more further through the other schools as well. So that's one of the key things that we'll be looking at as part of this review, to see how schools engage locally with on all matters to do with the DSM decisions.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. And just one final question, comment. I think that we need to be careful that this simply, and that was what my question was about with the negotiating within the schools, that it's not simply a head teacher's charter, which the Scottish Government binned that idea 2 or 3 years ago. So I do think it's important that teachers within the schools take a bigger part in the decision making, given that the powers that head teachers have and the budgets that they have now, for, as I said, the reasons that I've outlined earlier.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other member wish to questions or comment? Maureen? I think you're in mute, Maureen.
Yeah.
That's you.
Just from previous experience in a primary school, the management team, the senior management team used to meet together once we knew what the budget was going to be, and we would talk through different things and allocate them to different funds, and then that was put forward to the parent council and also to the staff at a staff meeting. And then we used to call in the financial advisor or officer, because there are financial officers appointed to each school, and we would run it past her. And you know, if there was any sort of debate or anything, it was to justify why we were spending that money, and then they would have taken that back to Gary, hopefully. But that was how it worked in primary schools. So all stakeholders were informed in that process. And sometimes, you know, the head teacher doesn't have carte blanche because it's affecting the pupils as well, and different initiatives that are happening in the school. We can target the money for allocated tasks. So it was quite transparent, shall we say, the process. I don't know if that's still happening, but it was a few years ago.
Okay, I'll just ask Gary maybe to confirm if, you know, what is the process?
I think, Kavina, that the process that Maureen so eloquently outlined there is still takes place in schools. It may change, but what Maureen said is the key aims around it. So that's still evident today, and we will be looking at how we can review that going forward with this DSM review as well.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Okay, is there any other? I don't see any hands up. So, Councillor McHugh, have you got anything you wish to say in your final words?
No, thanks for some of the clarification there.
Okay, thank you. We're happy to agree the report. Yep, thank you. Okay, we move on to item 8, which is the proposed permanent closure of both Kenner and Limerick primary schools. And is that with yourself, Robert? Oh, sorry, Gary.
Okay, thanks, Convener. The purpose of the report has 2 aims today that are outlined in section 1.1. There's 4 recommendations before the executive today, and it concludes with the proposals, officers' proposals, to permanently close both Kenner primary schools and Limerick primary schools from August of 2021. Section 3 outlines some of the background, provides some details of the timeline from the decision being made to go out to the consultation process through to the public meetings. Section 3.3 confirms that due to the COVID restrictions at the time, it meant that face-to-face public meetings were not allowed to be held in Falkirk, and those were replaced by virtual public meetings. The dates of the virtual Parliament meetings are outlined in section 3.4, and I was pleased to say that both of these meetings were chaired independently. The independent chair at these meetings was the chair of the National Parent Association of Scotland, and at these meetings representatives of Education Scotland were there to observe the proceedings. In section 4, the considerations for both schools are the same. They cover the same 7 key areas. It looks at the number of consultees, the summary of number of responses, a summary of the opinions of those who have responded. It then looks at summary of the main concerns raised, the matters that were raised at public meetings, summary of the comments from Education Scotland, and a summary of the recommendations from officers. By virtue of some of the key areas in terms of consultees, the Council conducted as wide a communication consultation as they could. They lettered all the households in the area as well, because we knew that they might be concerned about the future use of schools. 430 packs were issued for Bothkenna and 288 were issued for the Limerick area. That was a significant consultation. The number of responses for Bothkenna was 7, including the Community Council, and 10, including the Community Council for Limerick. I would just say that it's important that one of the things that was done successfully, and folk will say, why were the numbers so low? But I'm really pleased that David Mackay and his team stepped up really well, because a lot of the challenges around mothballing were dealt with by the team on a one-to-one basis by direct engagement with parents, talking to parents, to allay fears, to help support parents to make decisions, and to help have that shoulder for parents to have a bit of empathy with them. So I think this has worked really well, and it's helped address a lot of the concerns that parents would have otherwise had in the conclusion of this consultation, hence why I think the numbers are low. In terms of the opinions, Bothkenna 86%, 6 were in favour of the closure and 1 was against. The person who was against it was not a local resident. In terms of Limerick, 80%, 8 were in favour of the closure and 20% were against it. The 2 that were against it were local residents. Concerns raised during the process, and a lot of these were what we consider non-direct education matters, although they do matter to local residents. In Bothkenna, it was the preservation of the mosaic, and I'm pleased to say if the proposal goes ahead, we've agreed to that, and the potential impact of the community with no school. In terms of the Limerick, the comments that came back, there was one from our parents in detailed in section 411 that were in favour due to the social and peer impact, the beneficial impact it was having with their children. And also the staff wrote back to say that they're already seen cases where it's helping improve academic achievement. The other concerns there were much the same as Bothkenna, which was the future use of the building and the impact in the village. What we said is that the community consultations would go quite a long way to help allow residents and the locals to be involved in that decision making going forward as to the impact and what happens in their villages. At the public meeting, both public meetings, there was an acceptance of the closure, the inevitability of it, it has to be said, and the main concerns that were coming up were around the disposal of the property and the future use of the property within the village contact, and to try to be involved in that decision going forward. In terms of the comments back from Education Scotland, they are outlined in section 4.6 and also in section 4.13. Just going forward, in terms of the summary of the statutory report and arrangements, they're outlined in section 4.15. What we say to a committee today is that if committee do agree with the recommendations before them today, then the council has got a statutory duty to notify Scottish ministers. Scottish ministers then have an 8-week period to decide whether or not to call in the school closure proposals, and if they do, the matter will be referred to the school closure review panel for further consideration. So even though the decision is made today, the final outcome of that still rests with the Scottish ministers. The Details on the appendices are one of statutory need. There's 4 appendices, 2 relating to both schools, and I'm also pleased to say that in terms of the uploading of information as a statutory requirement to the council website, that was done on time. I'm happy to take any questions on it, Convener.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Councillor McHugh.
I'd just like to move the report with the recommendations. I'd like to thank yet again the team for their, as Gary highlighted in the report, their professionalism and their empathy taking us forward. It's not been an easy decision. It's upsetting for a community when they lose their school, because I think a lot of the time the life of a community revolves around their school. But given the fall in the role, then it's absolutely necessary for our children to get the best education, for them to move, and then for the schools to close. It's been very interesting journey to see the whole process played out over the last couple of years, and the communication with the community and the parents has been excellent. So thank you for that. Sad but necessary. So I move the report. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor McHugh. Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Convener, and I'd absolutely echo what Councillor McHugh said. It is sad to see any community facility at the heart of community go, but I think there's a recognition that from an educational point of view, and that was very much, as Gary said, dealt with David Mackay by David Mackay and his team during the mothballing process, about really highlighting the importance of the educational benefit to the pupils themselves going into a wider school opportunities at being crossed, particularly in the case of both Kenner and with Lyme also. So I'm really grateful to the department for doing that. Also grateful to the community for the tone of the conversation as well. Was difficult to have these conversations with our community, but I think very much people have been understanding of what the issues are, and that this is about the educational value to our children. So that's really important. And obviously it has been a real challenge during the COVID time to do public consultation and discussion. So extra thanks to the team for stepping up in the way that they did to still do that and have that meaningful engagement. And just I'll formally second the report, but to say thanks to Gary for highlighting about the mosaics and the murals at both Kenner. I know it's an issue I brought up during the mothballing process, and again has been highlighted by the community. And again, they've said that they're grateful for that, because it's an important piece of the heritage of the village of Skinflats that they came together as a community to do that. So it's really welcome that that's saved, and actually is really important. But again, we'll continue to discuss, especially with the what's going on with the properties, about how we, with the community, how we take things going forward. So happy to second the report, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Murtagh. I will open it up for any other questions or comments from members. Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Convener. Always sad when you see schools having to be closed, and certainly it's sad to see for our community. So I'd like to try and find out what will happen to these assets. Will they be available for asset transfer, or just basically try and understand for these communities what will happen to these schools, and what will be the impact on our climate change, CO2 reductions. Have we sort of quantified closing these schools will save so much CO2? And I just wondered how the sort of mothballing procedure came about. When Labour were in administration before, that wasn't available, and I just wondered how that procedure came about when the Scottish Government weren't allowing these closures before. So I just wondered, how did that procedure come about? It'd just be interesting to know that. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you, Gary. I think the mothballing procedure was already in place. It was available to us, but it was just something that hadn't been taken forward. I don't think it was a new introduction, but you'll maybe be able to clarify some of these points that Councillor Bissett's asked.
Okay, in terms of the questions you raised, Councillor Bissett, the first question in terms of the future use of the asset, the way that it works is that the Children's Services will declare if it's agreed, will declare the asset surplus to operational requirements. The asset then really effectively transfers internally to the council's asset management team for wider consideration of the asset, linked to community conversations, linked to the SPR, and ultimately they would be the ones that would decide how to ultimately dispose of it if that was the case. So community asset transfer or community asset engagement would always come into that part of the equation. So effectively, Children's Services would pass it to the community council's asset management team, and therefore we would be part of that process going forward to look at the wider discussions about the future use of the property. The climate change analysis, within the financial documents that were provided in terms of the educational benefit statement, there was a financial assessment made of the savings for energy. There was no financial assessment or otherwise made of any climate change. I'm not sure that our systems were as geared up to do that as probably we now know that we need to do that in future, but certainly there was no assessment made in terms of the alignment with the carbon targets, other than, yes, fewer buildings means less energy and also supports the carbon targets and climate change targets that we've got. In terms of the question about the mothballing, you may recall a number of years ago, what we did was we agreed a policy procedure around that, which virtually said that if the number of children, catchment children aligned to a particular school fell below a certain number, then we would consider that school for mothballing. So yes, it's always been there. All we've done in the last couple of years of it is initially we articulated that down to a set number of pupils, aligned it to the catchment area, and that allowed us to, it then meant those two schools in question fell into that criteria for consideration, which members then agreed to proceed with the mothballing, and now ultimately it's proceeding to the proposal for full closure.
And can I just add that I'm glad to see there was extensive consultation with parents and communities, and I think that's vital going forward with the SPR, that we continue that level of engagement. Thank you.
Apologies. I've got Councillor Munro.
Thank you, convener. Like others, I feel that the consultation on this was conducted in a very sensitive way, and the responses received were in the main very positive, and clearly the parents have found that the children moving to the other schools has been a positive experience as well. However, there is the challenge of these very rural communities, and I noticed two particular things around Lyme Riggs. One was the fact that there was a planning application for 90 houses there, which potentially could have made a difference. And there was also a comment by one person about the potential for using this school, given its location and its extensive playground and woodland and water, whether this could be used as an outdoor school setting. And I wondered what the education team felt about this, given that more outdoor education clearly is the way things are moving, particularly for some groups of young people.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Munro, for those comments. The comment that you made initially about the planning application for Lyme Rig, that was outlined in an earlier report we brought to the executive that clearly stated that was one of the things. The reason that it still went forward was that there was no indication really as to if and when that planning application would come to fruition. The second point, in terms of the future use of the building, it would be too early for me to speculate on what possible future use it would be. The council's got a clear process for that, but for the very reasons that you said, it may well be that the council may give consideration to these things at a future date. The purpose of the paper today is really to put forward the proposals in terms of the closure of the school part of these properties, and thereafter it would move into the wider council process around the SPR and future use. But your point about the outdoor learning is made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Coombs.
Thanks, convener. Absolutely, there's no question that the professionalism and the way that this decision has been made has been excellent. However, there are still closures, and Robert alluded to it earlier. The Scottish Government set out clear directives that there were to be no rural school closures. And yeah, well spotted to Gary's keen eye that you can mothball, and mothball's not a closure. And so the bigger issue, it was easier for parents to accept because the mothballing of the schools happened a couple of years ago. But my main concern is that the demography of an area is a constantly moving thing, and as new families move into these areas now, they don't have the option of a local school. So this is a permanent change. So irrespective of how many new primary school aged children move into that catchment area, there's never going to be the option of having that community focus within their own area. Am I correct in saying that this is a forever closure?
Okay, Councillor Coombs, yeah, it is a permanent closure from using it as a school. But just to say that one of the criteria that was used in assessing the proposal, if members will remember, was to look at the birth rate and the plans for demographic change up for a period of 5 years ahead. And that's the period that the statutory were asked to look at. And during that period of a 5-year evaluation, for both Kenner and Limerick, there was no prospect of the demographics of that area growing from both our data and the data that was supplied by the Forth Valley NHS as well. So that's one of the things that was considered quite carefully before we put forward these proposals, because it's statutorily laid down. In terms of the rural school closure question you raised, there wasn't a policy that says don't close the school closure. It was a presumption against it, and if you were doing school closures and rural school closures, a number of councils have done this. There's just a slightly longer process you've got to go through, and hopefully we've made sure we've applied to the statutory element of those as we've gone through these two proposed consultations.
As I said earlier, I have no doubt that the professionalism that you display in all your reports will make sure that you have done all the statutory requirements. However, I'll be really interested to see whether or not the Scottish Minister calls this in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've no other indications that anybody wanting to speak. So Councillor McHugh, do you want to have any final words on this item?
No, happy to proceed.
Proceed. Okay, are we agreed to the report? Yeah, thank you. As we now move from our educational functions to non-educational functions, I'm going to have a 5-minute comfort break, as we have been going for over an hour and a half. So if people can maybe be back in just 5 minutes, and just allow you to stretch your legs and get a drink. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, if we can resume. And we will begin with item 9, which is the Children's Committee. I'll start that again. The Children's Commission Community Mental Health and Wellbeing and Support Service. And I think it's David Mackay that's going to take this report.
Yeah, thank you very much, convener. So this paper is set out, the purpose is set out in section 1 and the recommendations are detailed in section 2. The background that members will remember had previously been brought to a previous committee back in October, and the background is detailed in section 3. It provides further clarification in that regard. Section 4 sets out the considerations for today in regard to the report in terms of the additional information that's been provided. Members will be aware that we were looking to set up a new service with a new service manager. We have done that. We've appointed Jude Breslin as the service manager. Unfortunately, she is also away for her COVID vaccination, is unable to be on the call this morning, but sends her apologies. And obviously, if there are any questions later on that I'm unable to answer, I will revert back to her. So basically what we're trying to do here is work in partnership with all of our stakeholders in our community through the work with Scottish Government and Health Improvement Scotland to undertake a process of planning the new service, which will obviously take some time to do properly, but expecting that will be occurring over the coming year. Section 4 details that process, but also the interim measures that we're taking. And Jude and the team are currently working to commission some resources that will complement our existing provisions across Falkirk Council in support of our children and young people aged 5 to 24 or 26 with their care experience with mental health and wellbeing needs and supports. And again, members will remember that this is targeted at level 1 and level 2 of interventions, and also signposting where required onto child and adolescent mental health services. Section 5 then details the consultation that's been taking place, and obviously we're looking to work very closely with a whole range of stakeholders as we progress this piece of work. And I think that's the exciting bit, is to make sure that we co-design and co-produce this service to ensure that it meets the needs of our children and young people in our communities for the immediate future and the foreseeable future. Section 6 sets out the various implications detailed under the various headings, and also details the various equality issues that we're taking into account with this particular piece of work. And again, we're looking to reach out to a range of groups in order to engage them for their support and advice and guidance as we continue to develop this piece of work. So I think in conclusion, this is a really exciting initiative here. It's well needed, and again, it won't be lost in terms of the impact of the current situation in the last 18 months on our children and young people, that we need to make sure that we've got adequate and effective resources aligned to the needs of all of our children and young people, to make sure that we provide an immediate response to those needs and ensure that they get the correct support at the correct time, and both in the duration of their need and in the lifetime of the young person. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. I'll go to Councillor McHugh.
Can I just ask David, first off, have you got a bus to catch? Because that was rapid. But thank you.
I do apologise, Councillor. I was just conscious of time,
That's
and
all
the
right.
members' time is precious.
Thank you. I think with referring to 4.2 and referring to time, as I just have done, I think it's right and proper that we do take the time to get this right. That you've heard me saying probably in the past about the different services that we've provided over the years and how we've got families dropping and young people dropping through the loopholes. And I think to be given the time and obviously the finances to build a proper service is invaluable, and I appreciate that. I see in 4.4 that yet again we're being viewed by the Scottish Government as good practice as we move forward with this service, and obviously they are also interested and want to get the best possible service going forward for the young people throughout our country. So it's great that they're looking at us yet again for good practice. I'm really pleased about how you've engaged with all the stakeholders, and particularly with families, parents and young people, because that is definitely what we need, who we need to listen to going forward to get the service right for the future. So I'm happy to move the report. I've only got really one question. I wondered if you could extend a wee bit on what support we're putting in place now while we're in the middle of getting this new service up and running. You touched on it a wee bit there, but I'd just like a wee bit more detail. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a fair point, Adana. David?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you very much, Convener. Yeah, certainly, Dana. In terms of actually what we currently have, we've obviously got existing supports within our schools in terms of pastoral teams and supports. We've also got existing counselling support within our secondary schools, and also that reaches down to 10-year-olds plus within our primaries where required. Jude's undertaken an extensive kind of scoping exercise, and what we've discovered is there's actually already a large network of supports within Falkirk that children and young people are accessing. The difficulty is it's not clear how to access them, so the signposting routes are quite challenging. And again, it's we're also looking to try and clarify the connectivity between the various programmes as well, to make sure that the young people are having their needs met by the right person or by the right group. So Jude's undertaking that piece of work, and she's also linking in and specifying some additional work. And again, the data that's attached in Appendix 1 highlights a kind of particular need around sort of 6 to 12-year-old and 12 to 18-year-old. And again, we're looking to commission through our third sector partners some services that we're hoping to get off the ground in the next couple of weeks, in order that that support is available now rather than wait for the new service. And again, many of these actually might become part of the new service, but until we've completed the consultation and the planning work with our partners and stakeholders, we won't know that just now. We've also linked in with the Scottish Government to have that conversation to explain, look, to do this properly, we do need to take the time required, and they're comfortable and supportive of how we're planning to do that. And they again also agree with the fact that some short-term commissioning is a way to address that local need. So much work has already been done, but there's still much work to be done as well. And obviously we'll be looking to bring further papers back to committee in due course.
Thanks, David.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor McHugh, I've got Councillor Colley, then I've got Maureen Hartness.
Thanks. Obviously, I'm very happy to second this and welcome the framework and the co-production with children and young people, because it reflects the things that they say are important to their mental health and important areas of development. CAMHS is part of the picture, but it's clear, particularly with the significant impact of the pandemic, that prevention and intervention at the early stages are critical. And I think the question that Adana asked about what's happening now, what are we doing now where young people have been impacted by the pandemic, having that development of multiple opportunities is crucial, and the proposals outlined within the framework give us a strong foundation for delivering better mental health. I suppose from my perspective, it remains vital, however, to ensure there are strong connections to enable young people to transition into adult mental health services, whether they're formal or informal. and have access to supports for their health and well-being. And it's just, I think it's really important to ensure that these are not lost in transitions from school, that we build where we're building something within schools, and within that children and young people community, that when I suppose at 18, when you become an adult, or at 16 or 21, I don't know quite when you become an adult, but I'm sure there's a point. But just to make sure that those are not lost. So I suppose it's a question around that connectivity between the two services, but also just a final wee point about, I mean, I think this is an area of significant interest to members, and I think that as the work develops, I wonder whether there's an opportunity, as with some of the developments around the Health and Social Care Partnership, for a briefing for all elected members, because it's something that we all receive inquiries about, and I think if we have a clear understanding of what's available, I think that would be really helpful.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. I think once the service is clearer and when it's up and running, I think that's a time that I think all members would welcome a briefing, and I'm sure that could be arranged at that point. David, do you want to come back on anything particularly around the transitions?
Yes, thank you very much, Convener. Thank you very much, Councillor Quilly. I mean, I think that you make some very valid points, and again, that's the work that we're doing. We're linking very closely with adult services, because that's not lost on us. I think that's a challenge of this particular piece of work. The age span is 5 to 24, not 26, but early education with Scottish Government are already indicating that it's likely to become a lifelong service. So we're already getting our head into that space about the service potentially growing over the coming years as well, about from obviously that kind of artificial cut-off point at 24. And again, I think that's also the challenge about, you made the point about when you become an adult. Discussed. I think it's all very much the individual and their needs and their support and their lived experience. And I'm sure some of us are not quite there yet. So I do take that point on, but we obviously are very aware that we need to ensure that adult services are involved through this process, as are our links with Children and Mental Health Service as well, to make sure that we've got clear articulation between what we're providing and what they're offering, to make sure that one falls in between the gaps.
Okay, thank you, David. I've got Maureen, then I've got Councillor Reid.
David, could I ask if the family support service is still running from high schools?
It is, Maureen. Thank you for that. So we've got our family support service. We've got our central team. We've also got the intensive family support service as well. And both of these provisions are available for schools to access through their team around the child recommendations. And colleagues are actively engaging with these services as we speak.
Right. It was just that that was a really good. It is a really good low-level intervention, and before it sort of got to social worker, that kind of level. And for the other members here, basically the team is based in the high school, and they were attached to the feeder primary schools, and any issues, they would go and visit the family in their own home and make it quite relaxed. They could then identify places to go for help, and it also helped with the transition, because they were coming from the primary to the feeder high school, or the feeder primary to the high school, and it made the transition a lot better because there were people there that knew their family background and all the rest of it. So I'm really pleased about that. The point at 4.6 is saying that blah 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 blah, interim reports have been developed, blah blah blah, and then it says CAMHS report that each time lockdown has eased and schools have returned, there's an increase in referrals that have been noted. And all my friends, and with the best of all in the world, when you are stuck with children for most of the day, most of the time, you're trying to teach them, you're trying to keep them occupied. The parents' mental health is suffering, and I'm just wondering if the two have an impact on each other there. You know, because it might not just be the child's problems, it might be the parents that are putting their problems on the children type thing. So that needs to be considered as well. But I do think it's a great example of working together again collaboratively, as was said by Adana earlier on in one of the points. You know, you're accessing services that are available, CAMHS, health nurses, the school census data, which is quite an interesting aspect. But you're working together, you're developing ideas for the future of the improvement plan. And also, I think when you're talking with these other services, outside agencies and that they appreciate more what's happening in school and at home, rather than we're asking for your help, but there's a two-way discussion going on here. So you're aware of what they offer, and then they're aware of what is actually happening in schools on a day-to-day basis type thing. But it does develop a shared awareness of the needs of the children. So I'm pleased about that. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you for that, Maureen.
Yes, thank you.
Helpful comments there. Councillor Reid.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I'll ask my questions as quickly as David made the presentation. I don't want to sting him again, but it's a pity Jude isn't here to go into more detail. I'm sure David has a good command of the brief, and therefore I would agree with Councillor Polly that we have a briefing at some point with Jude just to find out more of the details. I'm happy to note 311 that the design team will include parents eventually and young people who have been involved. My only concern is 4.5, where there are, I think, 10 plans and groups listed with which this will have alignment. I don't know if there's a possibility of integration at any point. It looks a bit Soviet actually in its formation. Maybe we have too many reports on the go at the moment. But apart from that, I welcome the report. It's long overdue and very welcome.
David, do you just want to make comments on particularly the...
Yeah, it was really just in terms of Councillor Reid, in terms of the size, because obviously we're trying to ensure that we engage with all of our stakeholders, and that brings its challenges in terms of the kind of reach, particularly of the arena that we're operating with, not only children and young people's mental health and well-being, but obviously dipping into adult mental health and well-being here as well. And I know we've got a plan to kind of proportionately manage that, because obviously we want to make sure that the voices that count are heard the most, and that would, to me, would be the young people, the children, the parents and the carers. And then obviously from the professionals' point of view, we need to take their views on board in terms of kind of logistics and the supports that they can potentially bring to bear. But your point's not lost on me in terms of the scale of the task and how do we actually manage that so it doesn't become overwhelming, particularly for those parents and children and young people as they're part of the process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. I've got Michael.
Sorry, thank you, Convener. Just to say that earlier on in the pre-agenda brief, I asked David, and I don't want him to miss his bus, by the way. I asked him a question about how much capacity we had in relation to how big the need is currently and how big it's intended to grow. Because I've heard words like there's a tsunami of mental health crisis going to descend upon our community here locally at some of the meetings I've been at. So David kindly said that they reckon that there's probably around, they've identified 5,000 people per annum that would need access to this support, and was confident that we'd be able to do it. So I was really encouraged to hear that. Some of the things I've heard locally and with people outside our own community is that when referrals go to CAMHS, that they're not always able to deal with them immediately, and then a follow-up appointment is sometimes a challenge as well. But I've got some reassurance from that as well. So my final thing is, so David can catch his bus, is just to let you know that as a third sector in the church, we're actually been studying with our life groups at home, with our adults, and also with our young people, this book, which is God's Plan for Your Wellbeing, which looks at physical, emotional, spiritual, relational, and financial well-being, and we're doing that with our young people as well. So just to make you aware that outside the education community, that the third sector and others, it's actually a journey that we're on as well. And this course has been endorsed by quite a number of prominent people, including Natalie Andrews, for the National Sport and Wellbeing Project Lead. So I'm grateful that there's a lot of people doing things like this, and I welcome this report, and I think it's very timely, very needed, and I hopefully that we'll be able to deal with all the needs that present themselves to us as we've been reassured. So thank you again for your report.
Thank you, Michael, and I think it's helpful to have your comments just around the involvement of the third sector. I think something that this whole plan is trying to do is to enable access not from a single point but from any point in the system, and I think that's quite important because people will be able to feel more comfortable perhaps in some settings than others, and it shouldn't matter where you come in to seek help. You should be able to be directed, signposted and supported to get the help that you need, and that is one of the, I think, the aspirations of the plan. David, do you want to comment on anything related to that in the
Yeah,
third
I'll just pick
sector?
up on the points in terms of the numbers, convener. Obviously, we're kind of doing some scoping, and we're aware of those children that are currently within the system and being referred through there. But equally, we're aware of some children and young people who may not necessarily have made themselves known. And what we're trying to do is make sure we've got a range of supports in place that then are advertised, that those individuals might then feel comfortable to step forward as well. So very much indicative figures that we're working with just now, and obviously hopefully they'll be refined as we begin to develop the work over the coming year.
Maybe I should just also say I'm also a football chaplain for Stennismuir, and the majority of the football chaplains in Scotland have also been trained in mental health areas as well. So that's another whole area that's opened up through the SFA appointed people. Just a side issue.
Thank you, Michael. I've got Councillor Coombs and Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, convener. As the Reverend Rollo just said about the tsunami of mental health, and it ties into my earlier comments about early intervention, and I think the earlier we can get these children help in whatever form from whomever is extremely important. And when I first skim read over this report, I was concerned about the security aspect of it, about the safeguarding, because I thought we were looking at children in residential care, and I thought if we give them free bus passes, there's going to be obviously a lot of issues with those that perhaps aren't happy with their situation and absconding. However, I was delighted to read at 3.4 that it is the children who will be in kinship care and looked after at home. So I take it I'm correct in saying
Joan,
that
Joan, we're still on the mental health report. I don't know if you're maybe talking to one of the other reports.
Children.
We're still on the.
Apologies, I have indeed skipped. They're kind of interlinked, kinship care. Apologies.
Okay.
I thought we were at the end of the meeting. It was maybe wishful thinking.
Sorry to disappoint. You've still got your time to come in though. Okay, Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, convener. I'd just like to say I welcome this report, certainly in line with the GIRFIC principles, where we're trying to support children and young adults, and it'll catch people with maybe who are in sort of where they have mental health issues in their infancy, maybe anxiety, depression issues. We should be able to talk about openly these days, and certainly. Reverend Rollo in his church, I know do a lot of good work, and all the churches do a lot of good work communicating with one another and supporting one another. And so there's just a couple of things that I just like to say is, so in the schools, is there also maybe a mentoring, peer-to-peer, befriender service where people could talk to another people just rather than go to counselling, just have a chat, get things off their chest? And also wanted to talk about the financial side of it. Are CAMHS going to be getting any of this money, and how will it be funded going forward? I mean, I wouldn't like to think that we're doing it for a year or two, and then if we didn't get the funding, it fades away. So I just wonder how's the funding going to be going forward? Thank you.
David?
Convener, if I could come in there. There's two separate grants that are being conjoined for the development and creation of this service. So there's one that's specifically targeted at the school sector, but there's also one that's targeted at the community sector, and both of these grants combined total just over £1 million a year. The government has indicated their intention to continue with that funding. And just going back to an earlier point in the meeting, as things stand, these are ring-fenced monies. But as we've said previously, once these services are developed and mature and embedded, we can anticipate that in the final analysis, the money will very possibly be mainstreamed. In terms of CAMHS, there's a separate funding stream that is going via NHS to CAMHS. I can't remember exactly the scale of the funding for that, but it's significant. So there's a separate development taking place to increase CAMHS services, as well as the development of this service. And as maybe you've heard me say before, just in terms of the pastoral support that's in place in schools, very much, Councillor Bissett, there are opportunities for children and young people to be having those kind of informal discussions among and between themselves and or with a guidance teacher, a member of the pastoral support staff. And part of the aim of this service is to build a bridge from what we would always have understood as regular pastoral support, if you like, all the way through to the threshold, which is quite high for CAMHS. And you know, as David mentioned, sometimes young people will have a mental health issue that is lifelong, but oftentimes it will be quite transient. It might be for a short period of time. It might be that an intervention can assist them to get over a problem, to become more confident and move forward. So what David outlined in terms of the analysis of what's available, but in particular the analysis of what young people are telling us about the issues that they face is crucial to the development of this service. And convener, if you forgive me, and I don't really, well, if you'll forgive me, I'd quite like to ask Callum, who's on the call, just about his perception of the mental health and well-being of his peers, and his knowledge or awareness of the types of support that maybe some of his peers have had, and any commentary you have on what we're proposing to be doing here. Sorry to put you on the spot, Callum, but I think your perspective will be really helpful to the committee.
And no, that's okay. Our school have got quite a good system, so we've got we call it a lighthouse, and it's a safe place for lots of pupils to go. So like at lunch times, they can go and speak to trusted adults, and they can put in wee slips in a wee post box, and it'll it's quite confidential, and teachers will contact them if they want to speak to other people, or they can go directly to the pastoral teachers like after a lesson or whatever. And it has helped a lot of pupils in the last couple of years, and it has continued during lockdown and that. They've kept in touch.
Thanks, Callum.
I don't know if
Callum.
Polly, I don't know if Polly wants to add anything.
I was just going to say that, Dana, that I think Holly's also there, so if she wants to add anything from her perspective.
All I would say is I've personally been helped by the Lighthouse on many occasions, and it's a very, very good resource that I don't think a lot of schools have access to, as we have like a specific one. It's like a whole kind of room designed just so you can go and kind of calm down or get help, or you can even just go and sit and have your lunch there if you're having like problems with whatever. It's really kind of helpful to kind of just get away from everything. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. And I don't know whether we might want. There we go. John, you want to come back as well on that?
Just very quickly, you know, any support with the children's mental health is always welcome, and it's good to see I think one of the things that we need to make sure we understand as well, that every teacher has a nurturing, caring thing round about all their young children, no matter what they teach, no matter whether it's the primary school all the way up through. And I think that's the first protocol for many kids, and it's about the importance of the teacher's role there, and just how vital it is that they can identify the needs that they need, and just, you know, it's welcome the service going forward, and just making sure that this is something. But I think the role of the teacher to identify and to nurture and to make sure that you know, any needs of the children are identified is really important as a first step. Just want to highlight that point as well.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, Maureen, briefly, if you don't mind.
Sorry, it was just when Girthik first came out and everything, there used to be little charts, and like in the infant classes, we used to do it at the start of each term. Every kid in the class filled this in, and like the infants, it was a sad face, a happy face, or a in the middle face, and they coloured it in according to, after the wee discussion, you know, maybe it was like, how do you feel at home with your family, and they would colour the wee face in. Up the school, it was on a scale to 1 to 10. So the teachers would go through them, and then they would notice that maybe somebody had coloured in the red unhappy face, and she would speak to them, and anything that was flagged up came to the management team, and we sort of did that intervention from there, just to talk to them and how were they feeling. You know, I know you did that for them, and how are you feeling about it now? So there was that. I'd forgotten about that. It was just to say that that's something that they do in schools as well. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Maureen. I've no other hands. I'll go to Councillor McHugh, but very briefly, if there's any other comments that you would wish to make.
No, happy to agree and move on. Thank you.
Okay, happy to agree with the report.
Agreed.
Right, thank you. Moving on to item 10 is the alternative family placement kinship care developments, and is that Vivian that's going to take that? Right, thank you, Vivian.
Yeah, thank you, convener. So this report is looking to update members on some national developments in relation to kinship care, and we're looking for approval to progress some changes in Falkirk's processes to support kinship carers, and as a result of that, improve outcomes for looked after children and young people. So we're asking executive to agree to note the role of the Kinship Care Collaborative, and that local supports to kinship carers should be aligned to that as the work of the collaborative develops. And we're also looking for agreement in relation to proposed amendments to both interim kinship care payments for looked after children and payments to eligible carers of those with a kinship care order. The background to this, and members will be aware that kinship care is quite a complex landscape, so I will attempt to simplify this as we go through. Kinship care, the definition of kinship care is in section 1.3, and it's basically where a child is looked after by their extended family or by close family friends where they cannot remain with their birth parents. There is a definition of that, and it means that kinship care includes both looked after children whom the local authority have placed with kinship carers, and also some non-looked after children who live in an informal kinship care arrangements. This might be something that is completely out with the scope, there's been no local authority involvement, or it might be something where a young person has been subject to a Section 11 order, which people might be more familiar with as a custody or a residence order. And there is recognition, nationally of the important role that kinship care plays in providing secure, stable, nurturing homes, for young people. And there's also research that shows that being cared for within the family leads to better outcomes for most young people. The kinship carers can claim child-related benefits, and there are certain young people, certain kinship carers, who can also claim additional allowances, which I will say a little bit about later in the report. There's quite a complicated legislative landscape around about kinship care. Some of this arose from the Adoption and Children Scotland Act 2017, which required us to assess and approve kinship carers of looked after children. This led across the country to local authorities developing processes to assess and review kinship carers, and this was reported to members, and there have been a number of subsequent reports which are outlined in paragraph 3.2, one of which followed was significant in that it was a resolution to a UNCRC challenge on parity of allowance between kinship carers of looked after children and foster carers. And the resolution of that led to allowances for looked after children and kinship care being raised to the equivalent of the allowances paid to foster carers, and that was subject to a report to members in 2006. We had further legislation in 2014 which related to support and payments to certain kinship carers of non-looked after children who had a Section 11 or a residence order. So a particularly complicated legislative background, and there are across the country different interpretations of what that means in practice. So in recognition of that, in January of this year, the Scottish Government established something called the Kinship Care Collaborative. This was part of the programme for government, and the purpose of the collaborative is to deliver improvements to the support of kinship care families across Scotland by looking at current policy and legislation and exploring what collectively can be done to simplify and improve the landscape. And the collaborative work is specifically linked to the promise, which members will be aware is the outcome of the national review of the care system in Scotland. And included within the work of the collaborative is how important it is to sustain placements within extended family, both practical support and emotional support. And there's an outline there of some of the areas that might include. One of the ones that's given particular emphasis is family support, and members will be aware that that's another of our work streams within our Closer to Home strategy. There are a number of wider national considerations in relation to kinship. One of them is the promise, which is the long-term reform of the care system. It promises to have children, it promises to have relationships right at the heart of the changes, and the action plan for the first 3 years of the implementation of the promise and the Pinkie Promise has just been published just in March of this year. There's a very strong emphasis on early intervention and support to families, and this specifically includes families who are caring for a relative, and that links into the previous information round about the collaborative. The more local landscape is very much about Council of the Future and Closer to Home. The Closer to Home strategy is focused on supporting children to remain with their families, and where that's not possible, to keep them locally and wherever possible in a family setting. And members will be aware of some of the figures relating to that. We currently have 17% of our young people cared for within residential settings. That's expensive. It often results in poorer outcomes for these young people, and the strategy is seeking to adjust the balance of care so that we have 90% of our looked after children and young people from Falkirk cared for in community-based family settings, whether that be at home with parents, in foster care, or indeed in kinship care. So one of the key work streams for phase 2 of the strategy is focusing on alternative family placement. And phase 2 has extended what was a focus on foster care recruitment to increasing internal and external foster placements and kinship care placements. And alongside that, focusing on supporting kinship carers so that more of them are able to provide care for children who can't remain with their parents. This has required quite a lot of change in procedural aspects of things, and paragraph 431 outlines some of that. Our kinship care procedures were originally agreed in 2010. They have been updated and amended over the years in the light of some of the changes that I've just outlined, and we've done a comprehensive review of that over the past year. We've utilised feedback from carers and staff, we've analysed complaints, we've looked at the national developments, and this will be an ongoing process as things change. One of the areas that's been difficult is how we assess kinship carers who've looked after children. They undergo an assessment which is broadly similar to the assessment of foster carers, but it's usually done after the child has been placed with the kinship carer. And in Falkirk, we pay, it's meant to be done within 12 weeks, and in Falkirk we pay a flat rate as carers are approved at the point of placement on an emergency basis. We then undertake the assessment, and at the point of approval, the fostering equivalent allowance is paid to the carer. This has proved particularly challenging, especially over the last year with all the other demands on frontline social workers. And while for many carers the difference between the flat rate interim allowance and the full fostering equivalent allowance is not much, there are other carers for whom there is quite a significant difference. There are also different interpretations of the regulations across the 32 local authorities, and while some have followed a similar process to Falkirk, increasingly the majority of councils are now providing fostering equivalent allowances from the point of placement. So part of the proposals that we are making in the report today is that we pay full fostering equivalent allowances from the point of placement. Relevant benefits can be deducted from that. And to further improve the service, we have juggled things around within our family placement team so that we can ring fence some additional capacity there to allow that team to take on the assessment of kinship carers, relieving some of the pressure on our locality teams. The other particular change is that a lot of kinship carers looked after children will go on to seek a Section 11 residence order that usually occurs where the return of a child to their birth parents is not possible, and we need to look at alternative permanent care. So we have strengthened in our revised procedures the robustness of scrutiny in relation to the suitability of a carer to look after a child on a long-term basis, and any support that is required to these types of placements. Section 4.4 looks at some of the financial considerations, and those carers who have gone on to take out a Section 11 order on a young person who was previously looked after, that means that the child is no longer in care, and they are provided with an allowance that is equivalent to that paid to foster carers. And the regulations that cover this aspect indicate that it should be paid until the child is 16 years of age, because at that point the legislation determining the residence is no longer applicable. Falkirk follow the regulations, but it has become apparent over the years that while young people can apply for EMA, that the loss of a regular allowance the cost remains significant, and the loss of a regular allowance can be detrimental to young people. So we are proposing that we would continue those payments until young people leave school and have access to an income of their own. In relation to consultation, there's been extensive consultation over the years in relation to kinship care, and the specific proposals outlined in this paper have been the subject of informal consultation with kinship care staff and carers, all of whom are supportive of the proposed changes and the goal to simplify the process. We've also, as part of that, looked at complaints and taken into account the conclusion of a number of complaints in relation to kinship care allowances. There are some costs related to the proposed changes. To pay fostering equivalent allowances from the start of placement would result in an additional cost of £70,810. With benefits, the actual cost may be slightly lower than that, and to extend allowances for those with a kinship care order to school leaving date would cost approximately £70,780. Kinship care is considered for children before they're placed in formal care, very much in line with closer to home. It's very much about supporting families to look after their own children. Foster carers receive age-related allowances, but they also receive a fee. This fee element is not applicable to kinship care placements, so the costs will remain less than the expenditure which would be incurred if children were placed in other types of family setting. So the additional expenditure can therefore be met from the reduced expenditure in family-based alternative placements, with an additional contribution from our adoption cost centre, which traditionally has been an area of underspend. So beginning to kind of come to a conclusion there, it will let Falkirk better meet our statutory duties. It will help to provide greater equality if we move to the proposed position. And it will be in line with the National Kinship Care Collaborative and the move that they're trying to progress towards greater equality. And the steps proposed in the report are steps which Falkirk Council can take in the interim to achieve more consistency and equity It will bring processes and payments more in line with other areas of the country, very much in line with the promise, and it's very much in line with closer to home strategy, which is one of the top 10 closer to home priorities. So I'm happy to take any questions. I'm aware that that's quite a detailed summary, but it is quite a complex area. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. I'll go to Councillor Colley.
Thank you. I'll just be very brief. I think it's clear that kinship care is an important part of ensuring children and young people who can't live with their parents have the opportunity to live with family and maintain family connections and support and wider supports. It can also prevent the disruption to schooling if a foster or other placement is out with Falkirk. And it is a vital element of closer to home and the promise, providing support for families to provide care and support. I think the proposal are sensible to provide kinship carers with the full allowance from point of placement, and it ensures that some of the financial barriers are reduced. And I welcome the proposal to ring-fence capacity in relation to assessments. I think that's to help reduce delays for kinship carers. And I think it's really important that the proposal to ensure that kinship care allowance is paid until a young person leaves school rather than ceasing at age 16. I think that the EMA is for another purpose. It's about supporting education. It's not about family expenditure and the cost of a household. And when that young person leaves school, they're able to claim their own entitlements. So again, I think it's very sensible and it reduces barriers to kinship care. So thank you for the report, and I'm happy to formally propose it.
Thank you, Councillor Colley. Go to Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Convener. I think it was such a fulsome report, and indeed somebody there from Councillor Colley. I'll just formally second and reserve the right to come back in.
Okay, Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, welcome the report. It's something that needed updated to be with the rest of the local authorities. So I'm glad we've finally looked and came in line with everybody else. There's a question with regard to further education or 16. If they leave school and go to further education, will that money then follow them to whatever age they are, or is it cut off at 16?
Okay, Vivian.
Yeah, the support money's not cut off, but the role of the local authority changes. If a young person is still looked after and they're in kinship care, then they can move into continuing care, and that would provide, the allowance and support right up until the young person is 21. The rates change at different points, and we have a duty to support them in any kind of further or higher education. That might be accommodation, it might be a range of other things. For young people who are subject to a Section 11 order, the allowances would stop at the point that they leave school. However, any young person who's been looked after at any point within their childhood is eligible to apply for what's called a care experience bursary, and that's £8,300 a year with the cost of their further education. So there's been quite a lot of attention paid to that whole area, just as people have taken on board corporate parenting responsibilities.
Thank you very much, Vivian, because going to later in their life, whether it's a young adult between 15 and 19, they change a lot. So clothes become more expensive. So I'm glad that we're taking it forward. Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Vivian. Really nice report.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Reid. Sorry, Councillor Reid, you're still on mute.
Okay. First time. That's it. It's just to satisfy my curiosity. If I may mention a family case from way back, my maternal grandmother took in a child because her daughter-in-law predeceased the child. A year later, the lady upstairs in the tenement building died, and my granny took in the baby, and they lived there until together, not brothers, not even cousins, together. Would that type of thing be permitted nowadays without there being any legal conditions? If it's kinship care, but it was unpaid kinship care.
Yeah, I mean, Scotland's got a proud history of doing the type of thing that you're describing, there in taking children in. It is not as easy to do that without any regulation round about it nowadays. We would count, the legislation allows us to count close friends or people with a pre-existing relationship as kinship carers. So if it was a formal situation that the local authority was involved in, then actually it could be supported in the same way as we would if it was a relative. If it's not in that situation, then actually it would come under the definition of private fostering, and there's different legislation right about that. It has to be notified to the local authority. We have to do checks to ensure that the situation is safe and is going to meet the welfare of the young person that's being looked after. So it depends just a little bit what the basis of the placement was. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I'm still struggling a wee bit, but I'll maybe ask it elsewhere later. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Nimmo, then the Reverend Rowe, and then Councillor Munro.
Thanks, Convener. Just a couple of quick points for Vivian and maybe Holly as well. Just in relation to the kinship care legislation, I know Holly mentioned about the kinship care collaborative and various other things being set up to help with this process. But I would have thought, just as a baseline, that we'd be thinking about updating the legislation to make sure it was fit for purpose. And I'm just wondering if that's in the process at the moment. My other question relates to the information on page 206, which details the allowances for foster carers. And also there's a paragraph at the bottom regarding the kinship carers. It does say that bespoke packages will be individually agreed. Now, I'm just wondering, will that relate purely to the care, the level of care that's being provided, or will we be deviating from the payments that are mentioned in this page to compensate for increased care? Thanks, Convener.
Okay, Vivian.
Yes, in terms of the legislative query that you raise, that is one of the areas that the Kinship Care Collaborative is looking at. They've recognised that the legislative and regulative landscape of kinship care is quite complex, and part of what they're doing is kind of scoping out that, looking at some of the issues that are arising from it, and taking feedback. The collaborative has local authorities, government officials, third sector, kinship care support groups. There's a whole variety of people around that table, and they're looking at what some of the issues are, what the gaps are, and legislation is very much on that table. It is, however, and they recognise this, likely to be a long-term aspect of the work of that particular group. Your question about allowances, we reviewed we didn't review the allowances, we reviewed the fees that relate to foster carers a couple of years ago, maybe possibly 3 years ago. We previously had 3 different levels of fee that we paid to foster carers depending on the skill that they had, and we reviewed that, and we now have 2 levels. We have a band A and band B, and carers demonstrate their skill and their ability, and that will allow them to progress from one level to the other level. We also introduced at that point what was called a bespoke package. So, for example, and this relates only to foster carers, not to kinship carers who don't have a skill payment attached to them. Bespoke packages would be, for example, if we had a young person in residential care and with a very particular level of support, we could bring that young person back to a foster placement within Falkirk Council, or indeed there could be additional support that would be around a kinship care placement, as well. We have tested this out in 2 or 3 situations and learned, from that. And it's very much about support that is put round about the carer to enable them to meet the more complex needs of a young person who might have experienced particular trauma. Again, that is in line with some of what we're trying to do through the Closer to Home strategy.
Thanks very much for that, Vivian. Convener, sorry, I forgot to ask, at 6.4 it mentions formal complaints. I'm just wondering, can we put a number to this? How many formal complaints have we actually had?
That's something I would need to check back, but off the top of my head, I would say we've had something like 5 or 6 round about finance.
Okay.
But I can find that out and let you know, Councillor Kerr.
Yep. Thanks, Vivian. Thanks, Convener.
Okay,
Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Just a question on 4.2. Have I read that correctly, that 16% of our children and young people within Falkirk District are currently cared for within residential settings? Is that a correct figure? 16% of all our children? And if that is the case, how does that compare nationally?
Yeah, it's our looked after children. It's not all children within Falkirk Council. That's the percentage of our children who are looked after there. Nationally, Falkirk does not compare well. The national figure sits around about 10-11% in most local authorities of young people in residential care, and part of what we're trying to do through Closer to Home and as one of the kind of top 10 council of the future priorities is to really shift that balance of care. The whole purpose of the strategy is to improve outcomes for young people, to be able to produce more family support so that children and young people can stay with their birth families, or where they cannot, that they are in an alternative family type placement rather than in a residential placement. Residential can be a placement of choice for a small number of children, but what we're seeking to do is to make sure that for the majority of children they are actually placed with families, and that aligns to the UNCRC, and it aligns to our whole kind of goal in terms of the strategy of having better outcomes for young people by placing them within families.
So it's 16% of the people that's in care, not 16% of all our children in Falkirk. Okay, so I thought I read it as 16% of our children. I thought, wow, that's some statistic, but it's 16% of the people that's in care.
No.
Okay, thank you.
My apologies, that obviously was not quite clear enough.
Okay, thanks, Vivian. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Cecil. Point 433 says to further improve the service, staffing within the family placement team has been refocused to ring-fence additional capacity to allow this team to take on the majority of assessments of kinship carers. This will both provide consistency of assessment, minimise delay for carers, and allow the council to meet our statutory timescale in this area. I wondered whether this process is actually up and running, because it's not clear from this document, and clearly it's a very important step on the route to enhancing this process. And why are we saying majority and not all?
Yeah, these assessments are already being undertaken. It's a statutory duty that if there's a young person who's looked after placed in a kinship care setting, we are required to undertake an assessment of the kinship carer to ensure their suitability to care for a child. The status of those placements is similar to the status of a placement if we've placed a child with a foster carer. So that's a legislative duty that we are already undertaking. It sits at the moment with our locality teams, so the allocated social worker for the child would undertake the assessment of the kinship carer to make sure that they can meet that young person's needs. Because of some of the pressures that our locality teams are facing, particularly over the last year, we've been experiencing delays in getting those assessments through in the statutory 12-week timescale. So the proposal in the report is that actually most of those are undertaken by our kinship. We have our kinship care staff. We have one post at the moment, and we have redesigned some of the capacity in the family placement team, which was previously known as the foster and adoption team, to ring fence another full-time equivalent post. That will allow us to do the majority of the kinship care assessments. It will not allow us to do all of them. We could do all of them if we did not continue to provide the support, and obviously that's a really, really important part, and we wouldn't be wanting to cut any of the resources we are at the moment putting into supporting kinship carers and developing those supports. So there may be a few of them that still need to be done by the children and families social work teams who support the children, but it will be a smaller number of them that the assessments will still be done, and we hope that they will be now be able to be done within the 12-week statutory period.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to just Councillor Colley now to wind up. If there's any final comments you would wish to make.
No, I don't think so. I think it's very comprehensive from Vivian. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I'd be happy to agree the report.
Agreed.
Thank you. We come to our final item of this morning's, or now the afternoon's agenda, and it's Falkirk Young Scot Looked After Children project update. And I think Mark Meehan, I think you're going to take this one, Mark? No?
I think it's Robert that's going to do it.
All right, okay, Robert. Okay, sorry. Robert, you're on mute.
Apologies. Thanks, convener. This report follows on from a report that we brought in September 2019 regarding the award of £100,000 from the Scottish Government to take forward a project to support looked after children. The aim and purpose of the funding was to support young people to address some of the challenges that they faced at the point of leaving care or while still in care. So through the Children's Champions Board that some of the members on the call this morning are well aware of, what happened was that we discussed with the young people what were the key areas that they would wish to direct this funding towards, and we were targeting young people who were in 3 different care experience groups, those that were in kinship care, those who were looked after at home, and those that were leaving care from wherever they had been in care and were moving on into continuing care, as Vivian outlined earlier. So through the work of the Champions Board, the young people identified that the 3 key areas that they wanted assistance with were access to travel, access to leisure, and support with mental health and well-being. Within the considerations section of the report, it sets out the project objectives, which was about improving health and well-being, removing financial barriers, and providing free access to certain services and support without stigma. So obviously we had the COVID pandemic, but prior to that starting, we identified 75 young people who were going to benefit from this funding. They were provided with access to free travel, free access to leisure facilities, so they could, for example, go and have a swim or attend a gym or take part in another leisure activity. And also they got access to the Young Scot Rewards scheme. Section 4.3 just talks a little bit about the impact of the pandemic and how we weren't able to progress at the same pace as would have been expected, and it would have been expected that the £100,000 was used up over the course of a financial year. Section 4.4 talks a little bit about the outcomes and the achievements, but you can see there the first section talks about the expenditure thus far on bus travel, £20,000, and a comment from one of the young people about the difference that has made in terms of them being able to get out and about and move around the district. Similarly, for the leisure access, there's been expenditure thus far of £16,000, and again a very positive comment from a young person about the difference that has made. In terms of the Young Scot Rewards scheme, thus far we've spent £10,000, and again a comment from a young person in terms of how they've been able to engage more when they're out and about. So, as mentioned at the start, we got £100,000. Expenditure to date is £46,000, but happily Scottish Government have agreed that the balance can be rolled over and used through the course of this financial year. So that is in progress. I think my comments would be just reflected in the conclusion section about the evidence that we're beginning to gather about the difference this has made to the young people, how it's helped overcome some of the barriers, some of the stigma that they face, and an important step in that is mainly around the removal of barriers to transport and the access to sport and leisure facilities, which were things that the young people themselves identified, as well as having access through Young Scot to some support around some mental health issues. As convener, you noted, Mark Meehan is on the call, as is Sarah Stowe, both of whom have been involved in aspects of this project. So I'm happy to take questions, but if there's questions of detail, I'm sure Mark and Sarah will be able to give you some detailed answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Councillor Colley.
I'm going to be very brief because I think obviously this is a good news story, some excellent stories and information on young people having access to the three areas that they identified through the Champions Board in terms of travel, free leisure access and the Young Scot Reward. And I think that it outlines the difference the funding's made, and I think it's really welcome. It's great news that the funding can be rolled forward and very sensible, and it's important as we come out of lockdown that we ensure that that care experience young people have the opportunity to build back up their experiences and support for their mental health and physical health as well. So fantastic, and I look forward to hearing more as the project progresses.
Thank you, Councillor Colley. Just very briefly from myself, it's often the little things that really matter. And in this case, the barriers that were identified weren't huge, but by actually being able to do something to take those barriers away has made a massive difference. And I just wanted to comment very briefly on the depth of learning that I and I'm sure others have in working with the Champions Board and being able to listen to those young people and what it really matters to them, and the work that they are doing with our services and to redesign in a collaborative way that will make a difference to our care for young people going forward. It's a huge positive experience for anyone that comes against that particular group and those that they represent. Very moving experience listening to their history, and I'm sure everyone that will agree that we want to be able to make a difference so that they have the same life chances as everyone else, and be able to achieve their potential. But I would want to say well done to the officers in actually securing the funding, but also actually getting the work with the bus service, with the trust, to actually get this over the line, because it wasn't straightforward and it wasn't particularly easy. But now we've done it, hopefully other things can follow through, because it was the right thing to do. So well done to everybody, but particularly our champs, and the comments that they've made are very true. And they will be more than welcome to share any of their experiences with you, because they are very open and they want to make services better for others that come behind them. I'll open it up. Councillor Munro.
Convener. Like you, I believe that Champions Board has had far-reaching positive impacts by listening and providing a forum to allow us to listen to the needs of these young people. And it goes well beyond the access to bus travel and leisure and things, and in that in some cases it's helped provide a safety net when young people have found themselves in conditions which we would never have thought of. And it enabled us in many ways to act upon these needs and to provide services in a better way. And I hope that this listening philosophy will be applied across all our communities and help act as a catalyst for other departments to change in the way in which the council now works for communities. But I think it's a very positive thing, and credit goes to all those that organise it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask if Mark or Sarah want to actually add anything about the experience and getting to this point, and how you feel as a result on behalf of the young people. Mark, you're on mute.
It's contagious, that, isn't it? Anyway, yeah, I'll start off and then I'll hand it over to Sarah. Sarah will give you a wee bit more depth on young people's experience than I will. I suppose we were really keen to work with the Champions Board to secure the £100,000 that we did from the Scottish Government for this project. And it's great their flexibility, the flexible approach that they've taken to ensure that we can carry the money over for this financial year and move the project on. We've also worked with the Scottish Government in the last month to begin to explore whether we can actually offer the same deal up using the money that we've got here for some young carers to try to get them involved. They were facing similar challenges to what some of the Champions Board were facing as well, and they've agreed to that. So we're having some dialogue with the Young Carers Project in Falkirk to look and see how we can manage that. But the priority is for looked after children and young people within that. I suppose what we're actually trying to do with the project is, as you're saying, it's improve health and well-being, and that will in turn hopefully improve outcomes for the young people involved. And it's been fantastic, as the convener stated earlier, the work that we've done with First Bus and with Falkirk Community Trust to try to get that done. It was a challenge and is a challenge going on, but that's all coming back online now, and Sarah will share with you some of the positive experiences that young people have had recently. Okay, Sarah, over to you. Sarah, you're on mute.
Sarah,
you've caught the disease.
No, we can't. Oh, we just can't hear you very well, Sarah.
I'll pick up on what Sarah, I think Sarah was going to say. Our mic's not working, so I'll pick up. There's been a number of young people have took on the travel passes, and also as the community trust starts to reopen some of its services again and encourage participation within that, a number of young people are actually been going along. And we don't just give them free access, they don't just have that, they actually get trainers and gym equipment as well gets bought for them, so that there's not a barrier in terms of feeling that they're any different from other people going along. They get all that purchased with them, they go to the shops and get it themselves. But they're identifying that getting out of the house now, they're really pleased to be getting out of the house, getting out with accommodation where they stay, and that they're meeting up, social distancing with some friends, but participating in physical activity and organised physical activity. They're reporting back it's extremely positive for them, and they feel as though the cloud on them is beginning to lift. A number of the young people are participating within another part of the project, which is about travel. So they're actually participating in sustainable travel in terms of the purchase of bikes from Recycle Bike, and training courses that go along with that on bike maintenance. So that's what they've decided to do as part of the rewards package that gets offered to them as well. So they're taking that up. I can't go any more depth, and I'm not Sarah, to be honest. Sarah's hands in the air. That's about as much as I'll say in terms of what the young people have fed back to us. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Mark. But it's good to see that the project's going from strength to strength. Is there any final questions or comments anybody would like to make? Councillor Kerr?
Thanks, convener. I don't know if it's my background that you can't see, but I've been waving at you for a while.
I didn't see you. I think it's maybe there's the light behind you. Apologies.
One of the questions, convener, was obviously we've spent £20,000 on bus travel. How will that affect with the new initiative for the Scottish Government about free travel for 22s, 23s? Well, I can't remember if it's 22 or 23s. Will we not need to use that then, that 20 grand, if the Scottish Government's already given us it?
I'll come in at this point on that. Yeah, and certainly that we were very conscious that this year that free bus travel may well come in, and that talking with people at Scottish Government, I think they're going to introduce that in September. So the funding can be used up until September for bus travel. Hence, that's why we're looking at potentially offering that same deal, if you like, to involve young carers as well, because we reckon that we're going to have that money left over, and it's to try to get them to the point of this. This project itself focuses on attainment, but it also focuses on the issue around bus travel. And we're very conscious that this was being seen as a test case to inform the development of the free bus travel for young people. And certainly myself and Sarah's colleague, Janet, met with the Scottish Government a couple of times to talk them through how we were actually doing it in Falkirk. We were the first ones in Falkirk to use the app system and linked to the Young Scot card, and the Scottish Government's looking at how they can integrate that process within the new scheme that's going to be around. We're not actually doing that process presently, basically because they've commissioned another agency to provide it, and it's a transition process. So we're actually providing it in a different route to the young people on a monthly bus pass. So that's yeah. So to answer your question, Councillor Kerr, this is a test project for the new travel scheme for young people.
Okay, thank you. And another question, convener. We've heard the success story of this pilot scheme and how much it meant to the young people taking part. If this is a one-off year, can we not ask the Scottish Government for it to continue? And if it's not possible, can we find it in our existing budget for to keep it going? Because it just seems a win-win scheme where these vulnerable children, young people, have got benefits that outweigh the £100,000 that we came forward with. Robert?
Thank you. As Mark outlined, I mean, this was a bid that we put into the Scottish Government, and we gratefully received the £100,000 and then developed the project from there. As happens with all Scottish Government grants, at the end of the process, we will prepare a summary report. We'll feed back the learning to the Scottish Government, and at that point, we certainly would be making a request that this funding would continue. From what Mark said, some of the learning from this project is already going to be used in terms of the proposed rollout of universal bus travel for young people. So I would anticipate that once government is aware of the success of this and the improvements to the outcomes for the targeted group, that will feed back into some of the considerations that at previous meetings Sarah talked about and Vivian has referenced today in terms of the promise and the whole review of what happens to care experienced young people and the supports that should be in place for them. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I would certainly be making a bid to government that the elements of this process that have been successful would be continued and potentially rolled out across the country.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Are we content to agree the report?
Agreed.
Yep. Okay.
Agreed.
That, Councillor Coombs, you had a question earlier, but did you want to? No. Okay.
I'm also going for my second jag at 2 o'clock, so I'm now you want to watch.
Okay, can I just thank everybody for their time this morning? And it has been a long agenda, and I do appreciate we asked for that people did use a bit of brevity it allows us to get through this. But I hope that you've still got some time to catch the sunshine, even if you are going for your jag. Okay, thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, Hazel.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Keith. Bye.
Thanks
Thanks,
to the
Convener.
chair.
So bye.